The SCP Foundation has discovered its fair share of mysterious places and unusual vessels over the years, and the eerie tale of SCP-2933 was no exception. After a series of missing persons reports all led to the same strange, partially submerged steel structure in a saltwater reservoir, the Foundation took it upon themselves to investigate the potential anomalous activity therein. Of course, they selected a D-class for the task. After all, there could be something dangerous inside. So D-13321 was charged with investigating the structure. He was outfitted with a camera, microphone, and transmitter that would allow him to communicate with the nearest Foundation site. Next, he was taken out into the reservoir on a speedboat and dropped off at the entrance to the structure. The exterior was heavily rusted and decrepit, as if it had been there for quite some time. But what exactly was it? How did it get here? And what about it was causing so many people to vanish? It was D-13321's job to find out. D-13321 walked through the open entryway, already anxious about what awaited him inside. He established contact with Command back at the Foundation site, who confirmed they could hear him and encouraged him to proceed. He paused for a moment, noting the pervasive smell of oil hanging in the air. Was it safe? What exactly was he walking into? They had told him nothing prior to assigning him this task. Command refused to answer the question, urging him again to proceed further into the entryway. It was not a request. With no other options save for the risk of termination for refusing to follow orders, D-13321 did as he was told. The open entryway had not been there previously, but had been created by Foundation staff engineers the day prior. He would be the very first person to walk inside, as far as he knew. Upon entering, the first thing he saw was absolutely nothing. It was pitch black, so dark he couldn't even see his own hand in front of his face. Command advised him about the flashlight in his pack, and he fished for it with trembling hands. The moment seemed to stretch on forever, him alone in the blackness, the crackle of the transmitter, the slosh of the water outside, and the echo that filled the dark expanse inside. The smallest sound seemed to reverberate through the whole place, bouncing off the walls and warping like the sound of the ocean in a seashell. He couldn't be sure what sound was real and what was a trick of the ear. Was that creaking sound his imagination? Or the metal about to splinter and give way above his head? Was that a whisper he heard? Or was it just some ordinary environmental noise sending that panicked chill down his spine? His hand grasped the flashlight, and he clicked it on, illuminating the room with a small sliver of light. It was like a drop in a deep, dark bucket, but at least it was better than nothing. He could see his surroundings now, though there wasn't much comfort to be taken from that fact. The room he was in was metal, all metal. The walls were vast, solid sheets of it, while the floors were metal grates. All of it was coated in varying degrees of rust, filling the space with the sharp tang of iron. Like blood, he thought briefly, with a sinking feeling in his stomach. He shook his head, cutting himself off mid-thought. No need to go there. This could all still turn out to be perfectly fine, and maybe unicorns were real, and the clouds were made of cotton candy. The smell thickened, clinging to the inside of his nose. There was no danger here that he could see, but the longer D-13321 stood here, the more a sense of foreboding crawled across his skin, settling into his bones until dread was all he felt. Maybe it was worth it to try and run, to risk being terminated by the Foundation, but for all he knew, they'd come up with some special new way to punish his insolence. Maybe throw him to SCP-682 as a chew toy. The voice of Command broke through his bleak daydream as they asked him to describe his surroundings. They could see the rusted metal walls, the great floor. They asked if he could hear anything. He listened hard for a moment. There was that strange mix of sounds reverberating through the place, just as there had been since he stepped inside. But beneath that, he could almost hear something else if he concentrated. Something that might have been a voice, but it was too faint, too lost in the cacophony of everything else to be certain. He reported as much to Command. His voice was wavering a bit in spite of himself. Try as he might, he could not suppress the fear that had taken hold of him. Command noticed it too. They asked if he was feeling all right. He shook his head. There was something bad in here. He didn't know exactly what or where, but every cell in his body was screaming at him to run as fast and as far away as possible. He could hear another sound, a screechy, scraping grind of metal on metal. Command prodded at him, pointing out his history of performing without any issue, even on high-stress assignments. He couldn't help himself. He snapped back at them. Because on other assignments, I always felt like I could get myself out of a bad situation. Something's different about this. He held his breath for a moment, waiting for the admonishment to come. Instead, Command simply said, "Acknowledged. Please proceed." He took a deep, shuddering breath and placed a hand on his chest, just between his ribs. His mother had taught him this trick as a young boy, a way to settle his nerves when he woke up with a start in the middle of the night screaming about a monster under the bed or in the closet. It worked well enough when it came to imaginary monsters, but during his time at the SCP Foundation, he had learned the uncomfortable truth. Monsters were all too real, and the shadows were crawling with them. But there was no other choice here. He had to keep moving forward. As he did, he spoke to Command, attempting to drown out his racing thoughts with his own voice. He attempted to describe the sound from earlier, that continuous metal against metal sound, that rusty groan. Command asked for more specifics, but he struggled to find the words. The echo was too loud to pick out any one sound and dial in on it. Maybe it was all in his head anyway. Hard to tell for certain. He kept walking, deeper and deeper into the darkness, with only the slim beam of the flashlight to guide him. The voice on the other end of his communicator grows fainter, lost in a haze of crackling static. Command advises him to turn back and head to the surface as soon as possible, lest they lose contact entirely. That was the permission he'd been looking for. He was perfectly happy to let his amygdala take the driver's seat and steer him the hell out of there. He turned around, heading back the way he came. He walked in a straight line to get this far, so it should have been easy enough to make his way back. But after making his way down the hallway for what felt like ages, he found himself face to face with a dead end. A rusted metal wall where the exit should have been. Did he take a wrong turn somewhere? No, that wasn't possible. He hadn't taken any turns at all. He muttered a curse under his breath. This place was changing, shifting all around him. The halls had moved around somehow, and now the exit wasn't where he left it. Time to try a different route. He turned away from the dead end and continued around the first bend he could find. He knew he was deep inside of the structure, on one of its lower levels, if it had formal levels at all at this point. Maybe there was some sort of staircase or ladder he could follow to get out. At this point, he was willing to try anything. After walking for about an hour, he stopped to catch his breath. He could feel a tickle in his throat suddenly, a blockage in his chest, like he had something nasty he needed to cough up. Once he started coughing, it was hard to stop. The force of it caused him to double over, muscles aching from the effort. He coughed up whatever it was into his hand. It was dark, reddish-brown, and smelled of iron. Blood? No. Rust. Well, that certainly couldn't be a good sign. Better keep up the effort to find an exit, and soon. But the further he walked, the more the notion of escape seemed impossible. He found staircases, but they only ever led down. He would try to double back and walk down halls he had already seen, only to find that they had changed or disappeared entirely. As he walked, the D-Class thought about a story he had read once in a great big book of myths at the library, Theseus and the Minotaur. It told the tale of a hero lost in a seemingly impossible labyrinth with a monster inside. Theseus had been able to navigate the labyrinth with the help of a ball of yarn given to him by the princess. D13321 would have given anything for a ball of yarn at that moment. Instead, he just had his flashlight and his rapidly failing communication system. As for the possibility of a monster lurking in here with him, well, better not think too hard about that. The more he walked, the deeper it started to sink in. There was no way out of here. The whole structure was designed to prevent anything that entered from coming back out. The only way to go from here was down. Idly, the man scratched his cheek and came away with flakes of rust on his hands. Speaking of hands, the backs of them were covered in rust too, a coating of it that hadn't come from the walls or the ceiling. It was coming from the skin itself. Whatever had rusted the walls and the floor and the air of this place was inside of him. He was rusting right along with it. He informed command of his condition. They asked if he was all right. He almost laughed at the question, but instead he answered, "Been doing this for a while, boss. Got lucky enough to make it this far. Figured it would roll around to me eventually. I'll keep the comms and camera online." Command thanked him and said something not many D-classes have come to hear. "I'm sorry, but it wasn't their fault. It was no one's fault, really, except whoever built this godforsaken place." He asked Command to relay his dying words to his loved ones, make sure they knew he was thinking of them even now, as this giant metal labyrinth grew hotter and hotter around him, even as the rust wore him away. The itching was starting to turn into a burn, deep down below the surface of the skin where no scratching could soothe it. Eventually, he reached a massive room, deep in the bowels of the structure. He could hear something shuffling around inside. He swung his flashlight in its direction and gasped at the sight. It was a person, or something that looked like one, at least. When it spoke, its voice was metallic and distorted.
"Hello there!"
It screamed as if hit with a sudden, unbearable agony. Then, it spoke again.
"Sorry for all the commotion."
The D-Class asked the entity who it was. It responded.
"Me? My name is Mr. Smiles."
It groaned, a loud, low, metallic sound.
"I apologize. It's just everything hurts so much, you know." "Yes, Mr. Smiles. Right here, on my leg. See?"
The D-Class peered at the entity's leg and could make out words in the rust. They read, "Mr. Scary, property of the factory." The entity scratched at the rust, revealing skin underneath, and a tattoo that instead read, "Mr. Smiles, from Little Misters by Dr. Wondertainment." The D-Class asked the entity what it was doing here, and what this place was.
"My father built this for me. He told me
It interrupted itself to scream again for a moment.
Sorry. He told me that it would keep me safe. Or keep people safe from me. I can't really remember. Now everything just hurts. But it's okay. My father told me oh God, I'm sorry. He would come back for me once he was finished. He needed me for something, and I wanted to be the best son I could be, right?"
The D-Class interrupted. Hang on. What do you mean by he needed you for something? Needed you for what?
"Yes. See, Father was very sick. The rust was inside him, so he promised me that if I took the rust from him, then he would make smiles for everybody. That's what was important, that everybody was smiling. After he gave me the rust, he was afraid, you know. There's something about the rust that it really terrifies him. He didn't even want to look at me. That is fine though, I understand completely."
Pushing down the horror at the sight of this poor creature, the D-Class asked how long it had been here.
"A while. I didn't really expect everything to hurt this badly, to tell you the truth. But my father is out there making smiles right now, and he'll come back for me someday soon, and we'll be together again. Just you wait."
D-13321 held up his arm, asking if the entity, Mr. Smiles, as it called itself, could do anything to help.
"Oh, nothing you can do about that. The pain really only gets worse from there too. Once you've got the rust inside you, it just spreads and spreads until there's nothing left. Just oil and smoke and rust."
With nothing else to do, D-13321 took a seat next to Mr. Smiles. Wish he had anything to distract from what was coming.
Can you feel the rust inside you?"
That marked the cessation of manned exploration into SCP-2933. The structure was designated SCP-2933-1, and Mr. Smiles received the designation of SCP-2933-A. No one, under any circumstances, may enter SCP-2933-1. Ordinarily, breaking this rule would result in immediate termination by the Foundation, but due to the effects of SCP-2933-1, that pretty much takes care of itself. Once a month, a small automated surveillance drone will enter the vessel in order to evaluate the condition of SCP-2933-A. He is still in there, where he was before, groaning and weeping from the pain of the rust inside of him. His condition is not expected to change anytime soon. There is nothing anyone can do for him. Wait, what's happening? What's that interference? Congratulations!
You've discovered your very own Little Mister, a limited edition collectible from the workshop of Dr. Wondertainment. You've discovered Mr. Scary. But can you collect them all? Mr. Chameleon, Mr. Headless, Mr. Laugh, Mr. Forgetful, Mr. Shapy, Mr. Soap, Mr. Hungry, Mr. Brass, Mr. Hot, Miss Sweetie, Mr. Life and Mr. Death, Mr. Fish, Mr. Moon, Mr. Red, Mr. Money, Mr. Lost, Mr. Lie, Mr. Mad, Mr. Stripes, and Mr. Collector. That last one is you if you can track down each and every one of them. Happy hunting! Where did that signal come from? No one should have access to these channels. Can we get a security check on this? Please don't listen to that advertisement. The SCP Foundation does not condone collecting the Dr. Wondertainment Little Misters. Some of them are perfectly harmless, but others, well, you know. Maintain a safe distance, and let us tell you all about them here on SCP Explained instead. You hear their footsteps coming down the halls, or are those your own? Can you even tell the difference? You can tell they're getting closer and you can feel the hate, the rage. You turn, shaking, and finally see them standing right in front of you. But in that moment, you might as well be looking into a mirror. And who knows? Perhaps you are. You just don't seem to remember having so many reflections. Have you ever heard the saying, you are your own worst enemy? Of course, it isn't usually meant literally, but what if it was? What if you had to fight a monster that was you? All of your flaws are reflected back at you. Your strengths, your weaknesses, your deepest fears with no way to escape except a battle to the death. Either way, you're not making it out alive. It's just a matter of which version of you survives. But this isn't a thought experiment. No, according to the findings of the SCP Foundation, it's very much a reality. There is a place where this nightmare comes to life, and it's known as SCP-1919. SCP-1919 is a hotel and converted mansion built in the early 20th century. From the outside, it looks pretty much like it did when it was first built, and it almost looks like a comfortable place to stay, if you ignore the eastern side of the building that has sunk partially into the ground. The inside, however, is a different story, where it's clear the ravages of time have taken their toll. The floorboards and ceilings are rotting, collapsing in on themselves, and the rooms are filled with debris. It's deadly enough to explore the hotel for these reasons alone, but this is only the beginning of the danger for a person inside. In order to determine just how dangerous it is for either one person or group to enter the structure, the SCP Foundation planned a series of research expeditions into the abandoned building, led by Foundation scientist Dr. Lemkowitz. The first expedition seemed relatively normal, at least it did at the start. A 39-year-old Caucasian D-class male, known as D7, was sent into the structure with a camera and a communication system, guided remotely by Dr. Lemkowitz, or Dr. L, and another operative, a former head of the MTF Tau 11 Youth Hostiles, who is referred to in this file only as T11. When he arrived at the building, D7 was unable to get inside through the front door or windows. After several minutes of trial and error, he was finally able to get in through the western entrance. Dr. L picked up a strange, high-pitched whistling noise upon D7's entrance into the building, but it quickly faded away and was disregarded by T11. D7 discovered a torn painting, a portrait of a young woman with red hair. Next to the portrait, shallow scratches could be seen in the wall, the floor, and parts of the ceiling. Suddenly, D7 ducked into a hiding place alarmed. He and the other two operatives listening to his audio feed could hear heavy breathing, and it didn't belong to D7. Dr. L recommended that D7 evacuate the building at this sign of another entity inside, but T11 overruled, ordering him to disregard that instruction and continue his investigation. D7 was told to stay at a safe distance from whatever was inside with him, and attempt to capture it on video. D7 turned off his flashlight in order to better hide, but T11 commanded that he turn it back on. Whatever was caught in the beam of light was difficult for the camera to see, but it threw D7 into a panic, and he began to run in the opposite direction. When prompted to explain what he saw, D7 simply said, "It was me." D7 ran through the dark, panting with fear and exertion. Unable to see where his feet were landing, he tripped over something and came crashing onto the ground, dropping the video camera. This allowed the observing officers to finally see what D7 was so frightened by, and it became clear just why D7 was so terrified. A man, identical looking to D7, approached from the end of the hallway, making its way towards the real D7. It was followed by another man who also resembled D7 and another, all running toward the original. They all looked exactly like him, with a few notable differences. They were dressed in the same uniform, with the same build and the same features, but each had something slightly off about him. One was missing eyelids, another had malformed hands, and the third had its lips fused together into a fleshy mass beneath its nose. Dr. L moved to cut the camera feed, but T11 demanded that it be kept running. D7 couldn't be seen by the camera, but the microphone picked up the sounds of flesh and cloth being torn, along with pained, panicked screams as the duplicates set upon him. After a moment, the screaming stopped. 2 hours later, the camera was broken, and the expedition brought to a troubling end. This was the Foundation's first glimpse at the creatures inside of SCP-1919, and it was not pretty. It did, however, allow them to begin understanding the nature of the building and what happens when a person goes inside. It appears that when a human enters the hotel, several humanoid creatures manifest throughout the building. These creatures look like the subject and are equipped with the same clothing or items that the subject brought inside with them. Though they are nearly mirror images of the subject, they are always slightly warped in a variety of ways. These have included changes to limb and digit length, joint mobility, sealed nostrils, lengthened jaws hanging loose and limp, missing eyelids, and lips that are fused together. These creatures are highly aggressive towards the structure of the building itself, as well as to the subject that they resemble. They do not, however, attack each other. They appear to operate with a hive mind, exhibiting swarm intelligence like that of an ant colony. Once they have been spawned by the entrance of a new person, they will not stop until said person either escapes the building or is killed. After the unfortunate end to the expedition, the Foundation prepped for a second trip inside. This time, 3 men were sent in with Dr. L's guidance, known as D3, D4, and D9. Video cameras were sewn into their clothes to leave their hands free and help avoid some of the issues that came up during the first expedition. This small team was sent in with the orders to terminate the remaining copies of D7 and further examine the hotel's interior. Upon opening the door to the building, they were immediately attacked by one of D7's copies, which D9 was able to quickly dispatch by firing his weapon at its head. Next, after a great deal of reluctance, the 3 men entered the building where they spotted something unusual inside. Dr. L was horrified when the camera feed revealed 17 discarded video cameras spread across the floor. They didn't have much time to react to this new discovery, however, because 2 doubles, one mirroring D7 and another mirroring D9, emerged from the wall and began to attack. Dr. L ordered the team to take shelter, then called the team of guards outside of the hotel's perimeter. They were ordered to begin an immediate full perimeter lockdown, preventing the doubles from leaving the hotel. D3, D4, and D9 attempted to make their way to a safe corner of the building, but found themselves met with a murderous double at every turn. At this point, Dr. L began to hear an unusual sound over the microphone feed, a high-pitched whine like that of a dentist drill. The operatives on the ground couldn't hear a thing, but on Dr. L's end, it was deafening. As the team proceeded deeper into the hotel, they became overcome with a strange feeling of foreboding. Dr. L ordered them to turn on their flashlights, but they refused and begged Dr. L to keep quiet. When prompted to explain, D9 said, "She can hear you." The operatives stopped responding, but their camera feeds caught a faint glowing white light coming from beneath the door. The door opened, and the light flooded the camera, making the images it captured hard to decipher. Just a few frames of a quick-moving female silhouette were captured before the cameras cut to static. The bodies of D3, D4, and D9 were never recovered, nor were their cameras. A third expedition was also sent into SCP-1919, but very little is known about what occurred during it. The video transcript is highly classified, and only those present for its events or approved to research SCP-1919 have access to it. An update to the SCP-1919 file following Expedition 3, though, indicates that new information was revealed about the hotel during the excursion. According to the file update, there is some kind of being at the center of the location, which is causing all of the other creatures, the doubles, to appear. The only information available about this being is the use of the word her in the official Foundation log about SCP-1919. This seems to match up with the last moments of the operatives in Expedition 2, when they told Dr. L that she can hear you, and the few frames of a female figure that were captured by their cameras. Nothing else is known that has been made available to anyone outside a very select few. Only the original report exists, and all other copies of it have been destroyed. The Foundation has undertaken special containment procedures to make sure that none of the entities from inside the hotel escape, whether they are the evil twins spawned by humans entering the building, or the mysterious female being at the center of the entire disturbing phenomenon. The Foundation has classified SCP-1919 as Euclid, and a 2-kilometer radius must be maintained around SCP-1919, with all roads leading to the building are blocked or diverted, so that no vehicles are able to reach it. This perimeter is guarded by a set of at least 40 armed and armored guards at any given time, as it has been determined that the doubles spawned by 1919 are equipped with whatever the human they are copying has. No one is allowed to enter the hotel with body armor or weapons of any kind. Anyone that approaches the perimeter that is not a part of an official expedition team will be immediately terminated. No new expedition teams are allowed to enter the building unless all doubles from the previous expedition have been exterminated. In the event that they cannot be exterminated, enough time must elapse between expeditions that the previous doubles have starved to death. Though they do not seem to feel hunger, the doubles do need to eat to survive, and will die when left alone for long enough. SCP-1919 has been sealed off from the rest of the world, so that no hapless civilians can wander inside and find themselves torn to pieces by warped images of themselves. But that comfort turns cold when you realize that the SCP Foundation still does not understand what causes these doubles to spawn. Is it scientific, supernatural, or something else? No one can be certain. Even more inexplicable is the entity at the center of all of this. An unknown female presence capable of wreaking frightening amounts of violence by turning victims' own images against them. What is the purpose of these funhouse mirror nightmares? Who is she? What is she? And what does she want? Currently, the doubles have shown no interest in leaving the hotel except to attack intruders. And thanks to that fact, as well as the reinforced perimeter outside, these copycats have not appeared outside of the building itself. But what happens if they do escape? Or if the entity that controls them decides to make her home elsewhere? There is no telling what could happen if this dark power is allowed to move beyond its current containment. Are you prepared to fight a vision of yourself, twisted almost beyond recognition, lunging after you with wide bulbous eyes, unnaturally long arms, and a distended jaw hanging down below its neck? Better hope you never have to find out. There is a dangerous creature that could be anywhere in the world, hiding in plain sight, casually walking through crowded streets filled with people. A monster that is nearly impossible to see, blending into its surroundings almost perfectly. Not invisible, but unnoticeable, almost completely undetectable. But then you spot a familiar outfit in a crowd. You now know where the creature is, but it goes both ways. Since the moment you find it, it knows where you are. There is now not a single place on the earth that you could hide where it wouldn't find you, and it won't ever stop looking. To the staff at the Foundation, this creature is known as SCP-4885, but you and I know him by a different name. You may have seen his face hundreds of times, or stared for hours at a page trying to catch a glimpse of him. To us, he's Waldo. While this might feel like a very long-winded and silly joke, maybe even a prank that has been inserted into the SCP archives, it is anything but. If you grew up any time after the late 1980s, then you will likely be familiar with the Where's Waldo books. But for the uninitiated, there are a series of puzzle books created by illustrator Martin Hanford. Each book in the Where's Waldo line contains multiple double-page spreads of colorful, crowded scenes. The goal is for readers to spot the ever-elusive titular character, Waldo, who is hidden among the mass of other characters. Waldo himself is easily recognized, thanks to a design that has become truly iconic over the years. He is always depicted as wearing a red and white striped shirt with a bobble hat in matching colors. Waldo also sports jeans, circular rimmed glasses, and sometimes a wooden walking stick. So with that important context out of the way up front, what exactly is SCP-4885? Is the character from these children's books somehow brought to life? Has the character of Waldo always been a malicious, malevolent entity too powerful to be contained within his own books? Well, not exactly. SCP-4885 only seems to resemble the famous children's book character. Whether or not he is the living manifestation of Waldo in the real world is both unclear and up for debate. Examining its outward appearance, SCP-4885 does share the humanoid shape and looks to be wearing the same recognizable clothing of Waldo. There are, however, two notable bodily dissimilarities between the Waldo on the page and the physical form of SCP-4885. For one, this Waldo appears to be much paler to the one found in the book series. More noticeably, however, is the fact despite wearing the same circular glasses, SCP-4885 seems to have no eyes. Should a person learn of SCP-4885's current location, Waldo will simultaneously gain an awareness of this person. Learning instantly of their victim's location, SCP-4885 will traverse any space necessary, tracking their target down to anywhere they might be in the world. The creature has displayed a number of space-altering abilities, including teleportation. SCP-4885 can also alter the state of his own matter, allowing Waldo to phase through solid surfaces. No obstacle can stop his advance, not walls, not buildings, not even his victim's own body. When SCP-4885 finally reaches the person who has learned of his location, Waldo will then proceed to murder them in an exceptionally excruciating manner. Using his matter-changing abilities, he will teleport or phase himself inside his victim, pulling himself through their body and destroying their internal organs. After causing catastrophic bodily damage, SCP-4885 will then wrench their victim's jaw open, unhinging it with enough force to climb his way out of their mouth, leaving them dead, their body completely mangled. However, this isn't even the final stage of Waldo's attack. There is a strange byproduct left after a fatal encounter with SCP-4885, a yellow liquid that is produced as Waldo exits his victim's body. When this substance comes into contact with the deceased person's skin, it triggers a bizarre change. The liquid will cause their bodies to change after death, their skin becoming covered in symbols. On closer inspection, it becomes clear that these symbols are illustrations, exactly like the ones found in the pages of Where's Waldo. These corpses, referred to by the Foundation as instances of SCP-4885-1, will then start to act in a similar manner to SCP-4885, and anyone who sees one or learns of its location will cause Waldo to come looking for them. The Where's Waldo scenes left on a deceased victim's skin cannot be washed off or otherwise removed, and the only way to undo an instance of SCP-4885-1 is to skin an infected body after death. However, this creates a whole new problem. If someone was to attempt this, in doing so they would know the location of one of Waldo's victims. This knowledge would mean that whomever was trying to skin one of these bodies would themselves become Waldo's next target, and would likely end up just another instance of SCP-4885-1. In other words, it would be an exercise in futility. Naturally, the nature of his abilities and attack patterns make it difficult for the SCP Foundation to contain Waldo. SCP-4885 cannot be harmed through the use of firearms or other common conventional weapons at the Foundation's disposal. You might be forgiven for thinking that making a handful of people aware of where to find Waldo at the same time would be a viable solution. After all, he cannot be in multiple places at once, so perhaps he'd be unable to kill these individuals simultaneously. However, SCP-4885 has shown to be able to cope with this approach, dispatching his victims one at a time, transforming each in turn into Where's Waldo printed corpses before continuing to the next would-be victim. If the victim is nearby, Waldo will force himself into their mouth, passing through their body and destroying bones, organs, and even the spinal column. When his victim is further away, Waldo will phase through the nearest wall and attack them, teleporting into his target and then climbing out of their mouth. Waldo's location, or that of his victims' bodies, are considered info hazards. Simply being aware of this information will cause SCP-4885 to activate. As a result of this, the staff at the SCP Foundation are not even sure that Waldo is actually contained at all. In theory, SCP-4885 is being held at an undisclosed Foundation site within a non-designed containment chamber, since even a number on the door would tip off what's inside, triggering Waldo's abilities. But here's the clincher, because nobody can know for sure where Waldo is without him coming for them. Nobody at the Foundation actually knows where he's being contained, if he's even contained at all. It is worth noting that, if someone receives a vague, non-specific description of Waldo's whereabouts, that he will make no attempt to seek them out. If he is contained, and if he was to ever breach containment, then the SCP Foundation has an entire set of procedures in place to ensure that no one ever finds Waldo. First, 36 containment chambers identical to the one SCP-4885 is supposedly held in are connected to a self-driving vehicle. An expendable D-Class personnel member is placed into the vehicle and a random number generator will select a number from 1 to 36. The self-driving vehicle will then arrive at the containment chamber chosen at random, and the D-Class placed inside. Within each chamber are digital monitors, and once the D-Class is inside the chamber, all of these monitors will display the current location of SCP-4885. The Foundation has kept a GPS tracking device implanted within Waldo, but this information is normally kept secret to avoid any containment breaches. The D-Class essentially acts as bait for Waldo, forcibly given the knowledge of his location so that SCP-4885 will consider them a target. As part of the next phase of containment, Foundation staff will wait, giving Waldo enough time to arrive in the containment chamber and dispatch the D-Class within. After this, all of the 36 containment chambers are transported to random Foundation sites in disguised trucks, so that no one is sure where SCP-4885 ends up. Every time SCP-4885 breaches containment, the entire procedure has to be repeated. The Foundation first encountered SCP-4885 a number of years ago, inside a small wooden house, the exact location of which has since been expunged from all the SCP Foundation's records. While on assignment to secure an entirely different anomaly, the Foundation's Mobile Task Force Chi-19, also codenamed Unrelenting Punishment, were the first to discover Waldo. The three-person unit consisted of Foundation operatives named Amelia Merrick, James Klein, and Kurt Stoll. The trio cautiously entered the wooden house where they were meant to investigate reports of an anomalous inanimate object, a pair of black spectacles. According to initial intelligence gathered by the SCP Foundation, these glasses were capable of killing anyone that tried to wear them, leaving their body covered in pictures like those found in the children's book. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? It is unknown if these black spectacles are the same eyewear worn by SCP-4885, but it doesn't seem like too far of a leap to assume that this may well have been the case. Searching the ground floor, the team had found no sign of the object they had been sent to recover. As Amelia, Kurt, and James made their way upstairs, something began making scraping sounds beneath them, but none of them noticed. In an abandoned bedroom on the upstairs floor of the house, Kurt spotted a drawing on the wall, which looked to have been made using crayons. He took a photo of the illustration, and this image is still kept in the Foundation's database. It appears to be a child's drawing, depicting SCP-4885 wearing his signature striped shirt and hat, with empty, vacant eyes. Next to it was scrawled one simple phrase: Waldo found Mommy. Continuing their way through the house, the team located the glasses they were looking for in an upstairs bathroom. However, as James bagged up the spectacles, ready for transport back to the Foundation, Kurt spotted another inscription on a nearby wall, one that the team were certain hadn't been there when they had arrived. James stepped in to translate using the Foundation's standard issue translation device. The phrase on the wall read, "The basement. The corpses from a child's book are in the basement. He is there too. And we're sure that you can already guess what happened after that." Immediately after reading these words, James began to groan and clutched at his stomach, showing signs of extreme pain. Before Amelia or Kurt had any chance to figure out what was happening to their squad mate, Fingers began protruding from James's mouth. They gripped his jaw and pulled it apart with enough force to send his jawbone flying across the room. SCP-4885 climbed its way out of James's body, and Amelia and Kurt both opened fire on the creature. Waldo did not react, seemingly unfazed by the gunfire and sustaining no damage as he approached Amelia, who would be his next victim. Shoving his fingers into her throat, Waldo wrenched apart Amelia's jaw, breaking it before he clawed his way into her mouth. As he watched in horror, Kurt made a panicked call for help to the Foundation, but it was too late. Waldo had already dispatched both James and Amelia, and now Kurt was about to pay the same terrible price. Ever since this incident, the Foundation believes that they have SCP-4885 contained. When his file was created, their researchers created an automated algorithm designed to wipe away any mention of SCP-4885's current location or the house he was discovered in from Foundation records. With SCP-4885 now assumed to be contained, that only leaves one question. The same burning inquiry that's been plaguing man for decades. Where's Waldo? In this case, maybe it's safer if you didn't know. Have you ever had an imaginary friend? Maybe you did when you were very little and then forgot all about it. That first friend you ever had, the one you told all your secrets, your fears, the one you trusted and listened to for advice when you weren't sure if something was right or wrong. The one you swore you would carry with you everywhere you went, that sacred pact that slowly drifted into nothingness. And then you forgot. Well, what if those imaginary friends weren't imaginary after all? Just what were they? Where did they come from? And are they still out there somewhere, waiting for us to think them back into existence? Today's story begins not in our childhood, but deep inside a hidden underground facility where a man sits in his enclosed habitat, protected by round-the-clock armed SCP Foundation security personnel. This man is a middle-aged normal human being without any unique physical characteristics. He is not a member of the O5 Council, nor is he a foreign dignitary or a person in any position of political power. And yet, the safety and protection of this man's life are a paramount importance, and what threatens that safety is the subject of today's video. The entity that hunts him, SCP-1447, also known as the Tulpa. SCP-1447-1 is the Foundation's designation for the floating quasi-physical humanoid entity that resembles the appearance of a traditional Buddhist monk, but whose face appears perpetually distorted. The word Tulpa is a Tibetan word that means emanation or magical creation. The idea being that a practitioner of deep meditation could focus hard enough to conjure a physical manifestation of a thought or an idea. SCP-1447-1 is a Keter-class entity currently being held in an airtight 2.5 by 2.5 by 2.5 meter concrete container suspended above the ground in Bay 4. The cell is to be repeatedly reinforced with steel plating, with regular inspections for any damage to the containment structure. Any cracks or breaks in SCP-1447-1's containment are to be reported immediately and considered a breach-level event. This is due to SCP-1447-1's ability to insert itself into breaches and cracks as small as 200 micrometers in diameter, meaning that even the smallest crack in its containment enclosure will almost certainly lead to SCP-1447-1's escape. While the Tulpa seems uninterested in killing anyone other than the facility's previously mentioned resident, it will not hesitate in killing any personnel that prevents it from achieving its principal goal. SCP-1447-1 appears unaffected by small arms fire from standard issue Foundation sidearms, seemingly impervious to any physical means of damage. However, suppressive fire from high-caliber weaponry does seem to have an effect on SCP-1447-1, appearing to temporarily disrupt the projection of its physical form. This concentration of high-caliber fire has proven to be effective in forcing SCP-1447-1 back into its containment enclosure. Explosives also seem to have the positive effect of completely dissipating SCP-1447's physical presence. However, this has the undesired side effect of the entity then rematerializing somewhere else in the immediate vicinity. This rematerialization is not impeded by physical structures, sometimes allowing the Tulpa to bypass defensive positions and obstacles entirely. Although SCP-1447-1 appears on security footage to hover slowly towards its intended target, SCP-1447's behavior and containment is quite the opposite. For 20 hours of the day, the Tulpa moves around its containment cell at a staggering 200 kilometers per hour, punching dents into its enclosure, hoping to create a weakness in the structure that it can exploit. It requires no rest and appears to have limitless stamina. Despite researchers' best efforts to film SCP-1447-1 using a high-speed camera, its face is still impossible to see as it remains in perpetual motion and only visible as a blur to the human eye. Attempts to communicate with SCP-1447-1 have been inconclusive. When asked a question, the Tulpa will respond with unintelligible garbled responses that, when slowed down, appear to be traditional Tibetan mantras repeated hundreds of times a second. SCP-1447-1 does seem to exhibit signs of intelligence and even deceit, as on one occasion, it was observed goading security personnel into attacking it with explosive devices as it was near the entrance of another SCP's enclosure, leading to a double breach event. SCP-1447-2 is the designation given to the man currently confined to his quarters inside the containment site. He is a software and hardware engineer and entrepreneur whose name has been redacted from official records. We will refer to him from here on simply as Steve. The following is information the subject gave SCP Foundation staff willingly. Steve was an accomplished man, excelling at everything he did and finding a great level of success in the tech sector as a developer and entrepreneur. And yet, with all the riches and fame that his success brought him, he found himself wanting more. His obsessiveness for a sense of meaningful fulfillment led him to drive away loved ones and dive further into his work, creating a vicious cycle of self-isolation, leaving him with a greater sense of unfulfillment from his life. One day, Steve came to the realization that what he needed was to split away from the reality he had created for himself. He needed to find peace, and he knew he couldn't do it where he currently was. He packed a bag and, without a second thought, decided to leave everything behind without saying a word to anyone about where he was going. But where was he going? He had thought to himself. Following a trend of Westerners traveling to Asia to find a new sense of enlightenment, Steve boarded a plane to Qinghai Province, China, where he had joined an order of monastic monks. As he did with most aspects of his life, he threw himself entirely into the practice, dressing like the brothers of the order in the traditional monastic garb, and even electing to shave his head bare, switching to a vegetarian diet, and learning the Tibetan mantras. He put his sole effort into learning the art of deep meditation, vowing to truly split away from the repetitive, unfulfilling life he had chosen to leave behind. During one particular lesson, Steve learned from an elder brother at the monastery about the concept of a tulpa, a method where a person enters deep, focused meditation to conjure a physical, visual manifestation of a specific thought or emotion. Being new to the practice at the time, Steve couldn't find himself thinking of anything but the image of a laughing Buddha he was used to seeing every time he entered a local Chinese restaurant back in the United States. He remembered how the image made him feel welcome, how the look of joy on the Buddha's face brought a look of joy to his own. Explaining this to the brothers at the monastery, they promptly corrected him that this image is not an image of the Buddha, as in the sense of the Buddha being a single defined deity, but just one of the many interpretations of Buddha. The laughing Buddha is particularly a cultural symbol of luck and abundance. The monks asked Steve to picture something else when attempting to visualize a tulpa, such as an emotion that has taken form and shape. But try as he could, Steve had become fixated on the image of the popular laughing Buddha and could do little to imagine anything else. On his own, Steve meditated persistently in this endeavor, truly expecting success and working towards it, with a fervent drive he put into every project in his life. And to the amazement of himself and the brothers of the monastery, his tulpa slowly began to manifest. It was small at first, only an image that he could see. He didn't think much of it, not thinking that he had created anything real. He believed the image of the laughing Buddha in front of him was just an overactivation of the visual centers of his brain, most likely due to the strain from long hours of meditation. Deciding to humor his imagination, he began treating the tulpa like he would any brother of the temple, speaking to it out loud and showing it respect and inclusion. It was like having his own imaginary friend. Yet over time, the Tulpa began to become more than just an image. It began to have a physical effect on objects around him. A bucket kicked over. A chair pulled back as a brother went to sit down. The imaginary friend was now more like a mischievous, invisible prankster, but still only one he could see. The brothers began to grow weary of the Tulpa, and with it grew weary of the foreigner that had brought it into existence. Meanwhile, Steve had become amazed at his level of success. He began to wonder if he could manifest other thoughts into existence. He began to think about his life, his career, his level of success. He began to think about how he could apply himself to impart his will on reality, how he wanted more. He focused on this goal of meditation, and yet could not help but find frustration in his efforts. It didn't help that the brothers of the monastery now openly resented him. Steve's demeanor began to change and become less optimistic and more obsessed with the memory of the repetitive monotony of his old life before coming to the monastery. His Tulpa, too, began to change, no longer fat with joy. Its appearance began to thin. What was once an embodiment of laughter and happiness began to morph into a darker, more mischievous entity. The pranks, too, became more dangerous. The Tulpa began leaving buckets of scalding hot water above door frames for unsuspecting monks to walk through. It then began filling the sandals of monks with snakes. Thankfully for the brothers of the monastery, the snakes weren't poisonous, until suddenly, on one particular occasion, they were. A pair of Fea's vipers appeared in the sandals of a brother of the monastery, venomous snakes that could only be found hundreds of miles away in the south of Tibet, in a region Steve had never heard of and had never been to. It was an impossibility for him to have given birth to the manifestation of this act without its requisite knowledge. Did this mean the Tulpa had gained some means of self-actualization? Could it contemplate its own sentience? Seeking to learn more answers about the nature of the Tulpa, Steve studied the teachings of the Buddha and the quest for enlightenment, about nirvana and the end to the cycle of death and rebirth. In his mind, Steve began to intertwine those ideas with the memory of the mundanity of his previous life and the feelings that lingered in his stomach of it being unfulfilling and empty. How he had desperately wanted the daily cycle of mundanity to end, how he wanted peace. Little did he know, in doing so, he was creating a manifestation with the express goal of ending his life. As Steve began to enter longer and deeper sessions of meditation, the Tulpa began to grow more self-actualizing and independent of his will. It became harder to control, maleficent, and one day, Steve realized he could no longer picture the laughing Buddha that had once filled him with joy. From that moment on, the Tulpa's face became unrecognizable and was no longer in a fixed state, but in constant movement, so that no facial features could be visible. It was that night the monks had caught the Tulpa holding a knife to Steve's throat. Channeling their meditative power of actualization, they managed to collectively banish the Tulpa from the monastery, but it was not for long. The Tulpa began to follow Steve wherever he went, a physical embodiment of his wish to end the repeating cycle of his life and bring him peace. Peace by means of the extinguishing of his life. The existence of SCP-1447-1 was first brought to the attention of Foundation staff when Steve arrived at Site-73 seeking sanctuary from the Tulpa he had been running from. It is unclear to Foundation staff how the software mogul came to know of the location of Site-73. All that could be gained from questioning him on the matter is that he received the information from the monks at a lamasery in Qinghai Province, China. Steve was given the designation SCP-1447-2 because of his relation to the entity, and then placed in secure confinement at the facility. 2 days later, security personnel made contact with the entity when it attacked the facility in search of the tech mogul, resulting in the death of 2 agents. The attacks from SCP-1447 ceased when Steve was evacuated via airlift to London, and then later moved again to Site-60. In just 3 weeks after this change, the Tulpa had already caught up with Steve, attacking the facility and becoming enraged by the interference from security personnel, slaughtering countless members of SCP staff in its wake. It is here at this facility that the members of security personnel were first able to use high-caliber firepower to push back the Tulpa's advance into a makeshift concrete enclosure, which would eventually come to be SCP-1447-1's current containment cell. Dr. Rolfus, an SCP researcher, was the first to interview Steve after assigning him to the designation SCP-1447-2. He was given this designation when Foundation staff realized that the person known as Steve, real name redacted, had in fact never left the United States for Qinghai province and had been leading his life as a successful tech mogul without any notable interruption. Researchers became unsure whether Steve was in fact who he said he was, or instead an entity similar to SCP-1447-1. When confronted with images of his doppelganger in news and media reports living out his life and assuming his identity, SCP-1447-2 was unable to explain the anomaly and asserted that he was the true original version of himself, suggesting that a rival technology company, or even his own for that matter, may have hired a lookalike to take his place as head of the business in his absence. When the public counterpart of SCP-1447-2 was recently found deceased, testing of the subject's hair and tissue showed no anomalous characteristics of any kind. It is believed SCP-1447-1 may have been somehow responsible for the mysterious death. A prevailing theory regarding the existence of SCP-1447-2's counterpart posits that Steve may have been in fact able to manifest two tulpas into existence. Steve may have suffered a traumatic mental breakdown that perhaps, unbeknownst to him, led to the creation of a secondary personality that later manifested itself into existence following his training in meditation and practice in creating a tulpa. It may have been this dual manifestation that led to Steve's loss of control of SCP-1447-1 in the first place. SCP-1447-2 remains adamant that he has the power to put an end to the tulpa's existence through the application of methods of concentration and meditative practice. SCP-1447-2 dedicates at the very least 4 hours a day to meditating on the following topics. SCP-1447-1 is getting weaker. SCP-1447-1 is dying. SCP-1447-1 is unable to maintain physical form. To his credit, Foundation researchers have observed SCP-1447-1 is severely curtailed during periods in which its counterpart engages in focused meditation on the abolition of the tulpa. During these periods, SCP-1447-1 is almost completely still, adopting the Vajra meditation position. It is believed through self-actualization, the tulpa can meditate on its own existence, counteracting the meditative attacks against its ability to exist in its manifested form. To aid in this endeavor, Foundation staff have considered different ways to disrupt SCP-1447-1's meditation. At first, they suggested a hydrochloric acid bath be pumped into its enclosure, but then withdrew that proposal on fears it would surely use whatever delivery mechanism into the enclosure as a means of escape. Further suggestions put forward for the matter include using microwave emitters to remotely heat the interior of the unit, and the use of high-volume, high-intensity sonic equipment proven to inhibit concentration. Staff is also instructed to assist in this effort by channeling positive thoughts, incorporating the demise and destruction of SCP-1447-1. Positive slogans are posted in the hallways and break rooms around the facility to assist in positive thinking. Weekly therapy visits for all staff members are mandatory to ensure an environment of strong mental health, and complimentary gym memberships are given out to employees to promote physical well-being and motivated thinking. In the only interview on file with the human known as SCP-1447-2, Steve, Dr. Rolfus asked the subject what would happen if the tulpa were allowed to kill him. SCP-1447-2 refused to answer, leaving Foundation researchers to arrive at two possible theories. First, if SCP-1447-1 destroys the human that is responsible for its existence, then surely it too will cease to exist. Though when researchers tested this theory by inflicting different levels of physical pain to SCP-1447-2, the tulpa appeared to have no effect or change in its behavior. The second theory, and the one with the greater support of evidence, is that if the tulpa kills SCP-1447-2, and it has already demonstrated that it has the ability to meditate on its own existence, then its behavior from then on out is entirely impossible to predict. At the moment, its fixation on SCP-1447-2 has been a large contributing factor to the facility's ability to contain it. If it were to decide that its new purpose was to bring its version of peace to every life on the planet, there would be little the Foundation could do to stop it. That outcome must be avoided at all costs, and by extension, the life of the human known as SCP-1447-2 must be protected. So, hopefully, you never had an imaginary friend manifest itself into existence and try to kill you. But what we can all agree on is that some things are better left in our forgotten childhood memories. Welcome to Top 3 Evil SCP Children. Let's set the scene here. Imagine you're a parent. Okay, we know that feels increasingly unrealistic in today's economy, but work with us here. You clicked on this video after all. You've had a hard day at work, and when you come home, you might not have the energy to play with your little bundles of joy. So you decide to hire the world's cheapest babysitter to buy you a little relaxation time. The good old television. It worked for your parents, and by God, it'll work for you too. You recline in your armchair and flick through the channels until you find something that seems to have your kid transfixed. It's a loud, hyperactive cartoon with a Skittles vomit color scheme. It's the kind of thing that probably rots kids' brains faster than sherbet rots their teeth. But it's on an educational channel, so what could be the harm of it, really? As your kid sits there, eyes glued to the screen, you feel a wave of fatigue wash over you. Maybe it's all the exhaustion you've been saving up over the course of a hard day's work is hitting you. Since your kid is already occupied, there doesn't seem to be that much harm in catching a few winks. You blink, and you're awake hours later. The sun's already gone down outside, and the only light is that snowstorm black and white of television static. In front of it is the cross-legged silhouette of your kid, staring at the abstract visual noise with rapt attention. He even laughs occasionally. Something about it feels wrong. You gingerly place a hand on your kid's shoulder and give him a good-natured shake. That snaps him out of it. He turns around and gives you a warm, contented grin. "What's up, sport?" you say, suppressing a yawn. "I was just learning with Bobble," he says. "Bobble?" "The clown," he says, like it's the most obvious thing in the world, as he gives a slight nod towards the static blotted screen. You force a smile of your own and try to play along. It's a good thing to encourage an active imagination in children, isn't it? You could swear you read that in all those parenting books you read back when you were expecting. "Learn anything fun?" you ask. That wins you the biggest smile of all. "Oh yeah, lots of things." You turn off the TV and let your kid go to bed. Maybe that's what you need too, after all. You're in that strange liminal space between wake and sleep, drifting through a slightly uneasy haze. You know that what happened with your kid and the TV shouldn't unnerve you so much. Kids usually do innocently freaky stuff all the time. There's whole Ask Reddit threads full of it. You really shouldn't worry so much. So you do the sensible thing. You turn in for the night. Maybe you'll even take the day off work tomorrow. All this might just be stress and exhaustion talking. When was the last day you took off anyway? As your mind floods with comforting justifications, you drift off to a fitful sleep. The clown. Well, you've always hated clowns. As the land of dreams receives you, your last conscious thought is to not let your kid watch that channel again. But that's not a choice you get to make anymore. When you suddenly wake up in the middle of the night, perhaps from a nightmare you don't remember, it's your instinct to sit bolt upright in shock. But that doesn't happen this time. In fact, you find that you can't really move at all. You try to speak. Nothing. For a second, you think it might be that dreaded sleep paralysis that you've read so much about. But one look down the length of your body proves that to be horribly, horribly wrong. You've been tied to the bed. Looks like those same ropes you kept in the garage for maintenance projects. Your mouth is sealed shut by a shimmering strip of duct tape, and at the edge of your bed, you see a small figure standing in the dark, holding something. As your eyes adjust to the low light, you realize it's your kid, and they're carrying the hatchet you kept in the shed. "I'm gonna show you one of the things Bobble taught me," he says. "I think it's gonna be a whole lot of fun." This isn't normal, unless your kid has been exposed to SCP-993, also known as Bobble the Clown. This is a bit of an exception on this list, given that Bobble himself isn't actually an evil child. He's a cartoon clown that appears on televisions across the globe to teach his unique life lessons. Why is he on this list? because he's one of the biggest exporters of evil children in the Foundation's entire anomalous roster. That's because the kind of lessons that Bobble teaches aren't so much here are your ABCs and learning your times tables, as much as they are here's how to restrain a victim for torture, and here are 3 handy ways of disposing of a body. And Bobble is extremely persuasive in his teaching, with the children who watch his shows being substantially more likely to commit violent and antisocial acts than kids who haven't been exposed to a malevolent supernatural TV clown. Perhaps you comfort yourself by thinking, well, if I saw a child watching a TV clown instruct them on how to properly construct a pipe bomb, I would simply change the channel to Mr. Rogers or Sesame Street. Elmo never made an IED. Sadly, that wouldn't work, because Bobble has a remarkable ability to make adults fall asleep while watching his show, just to make sure that he can have some real quality time alone with your kids. And by the time you wake up, they're really much more his kids than yours anyway. But these next kids don't need to be taught to be evil. In fact, it comes to them as naturally as breathing. Unlike the horrors of Bobble, you don't need to have any children already in your life to be in danger here. Let's take an extremely average day. The kind you move through without thinking. Every action is muscle memory. Every moment is a repeat of countless others. Say you're craving a sandwich, but don't have any bread in your kitchen, so you decide to walk to the store and get some. It's still early after all, and it's a calm, sunny day outside. The kind of day where anything could happen. You walk with a spring in your step, maybe listening to your favorite music on headphones or earbuds as you go, just being quietly grateful for being alive as you pass down an alley. It's the perfect shortcut to the grocery store, one you've taken more times than you can even recount. And then the most eerie feeling comes over you, a squirming sensation in your stomach, the prickling of hairs on the back of your neck. You've heard it described in horror fiction and accounts of scary experiences online so many times before, but you've never actually felt it until now. That uncanny feeling that right at this moment, you're being watched. You stop and turn your head, looking over your shoulder. That's when you see her, down at the far end of the alley, the area you were just walking through to get here. A young girl in an old-fashioned private school uniform, wearing a dirty plastic pig mask, carrying a threadbare little doll. It takes you off guard so badly that you pivot on your heels to get a proper look, but by the time you've done that, she's already gone. That couldn't have been your imagination, could it? Your mind isn't the sort to play these kind of tricks on you. Sure, you watch SCP videos on YouTube and enjoy the occasional creepypasta, but why would you imagine something so vivid, so real, watching you from a safe distance? Though at that moment, safe is the last thing on your mind. You don't feel so hungry for that sandwich anymore. You want to get home as soon as possible, where you feel a little more secure, a little more in control. But all the while during that short walk back, you feel nervous, paranoid even. You keep stealing furtive little glances over your shoulder, and every time you do, you feel like you catch a glimpse of something not quite the same, but eerily similar. A little boy in a rabbit mask and a winter coat, carrying a doll by its leg. Another doll-holding girl in a bright pink beauty pageant dress, with a goat mask obscuring her face. Either you're about to be the new star of the world's cruelest hidden camera prank show, you're going completely insane, or something even worse is happening to you, and you don't really like the idea of any of that, so you block it all out and hurry back home. When you're inside, you lock every door, close every window, and pull tight the shutters and the curtains. You try to ignore it when you see shapes passing on the other side. You just need to sleep, that's all. Whatever's happening out here, it can't reach you in your dreams. You cling to the childish idea that perhaps your covers will be armor from the monsters outside. But just like the unfortunate parent in our last little vignette, you're about to get some bedside visitors. But the scariest part here is, if given the choice between them, you're better off taking the kid with the hatchet than what's about to happen to you. You wake up in the middle of the night surrounded by the ghostly children in the animal masks. They stand hand in hand with their raggedy dolls at their feet, as though incanting some kind of unknown ritual. You feel a strange power pulsing, vein-like in the room. But before you can do anything, you're asleep again. And then it's morning. No sign of the horrors that unfolded the night before. Perhaps all of it had been a dream, even the walk to the store. That's a more comforting belief than entertaining that any of this awfulness had been real. But while your beliefs can protect you from acknowledging the truth, they can't protect you from the changes about to transpire in your body. It'll start with the loss of your minor senses, your sense of smell, hearing, and taste dampening somewhat over the next week, like you've gotten a bad cold or you're listening underwater. You might notice your skin and eye color starting to alter a little too, becoming tight and shiny, almost like plastic. Then your major senses will start to fail you. Your sense of vision and touch will begin to falter, gradually separating you from the physical sensations of the world. Your organs will start to contract and twist into your body, going from flesh to cotton and polyester. You'll start withering away, becoming less and less yourself. You have no ability to control your body or your mind as you twist and shrivel and transform. And in the end, you'll just be another doll for the children. And you won't be the last either. At least when it comes to SCP-747 children and dolls, some part of you might remain. Our ultimate evil SCP child, though, they're not the kind to ever leave leftovers. Think back to when you were a kid. For some of our younger audience members, that might not even involve casting your mind back all that far. Picture all those carefree summer days when the sunset always felt hours away. No matter the time of day, hanging out with friends and making memories. Sure, there are those days where you go to the movies or sleep over at each other's houses and play video games all day and all night, but that's not one of these days. No, on a day like this, it'd be a crime to spend it indoors. So instead, you and your friends go out to a nearby park to play some soccer. The ground's flat enough, and you use your backpacks as makeshift goalposts. But one of you kicks the ball a little too hard, and it goes skidding off into the woods nearby. Naturally, you follow it. It's a good ball, one you're not about to abandon. You can't look like a coward in front of your friends, not just because it's the ball, but because of that sudden, unamiable fear creeping in as the trees close around you. But you have every reason to be afraid. You just don't know it yet. It doesn't take you long to find the ball, at least. While you and your buddies are leaning in to grab it, you hear a strange noise. Psst! You look up, wondering if it's maybe some kind of animal or bird, and you're shocked at what you see. It's a treehouse. Not the big professional kind you mainly see in cartoons. It looks a lot more homemade, cobbled together out of fallen branches and rough, unrefined pieces of wood. There's a kid staring out of the entrance, a kid whose face seems oddly familiar, but you can't place where you've seen him before. Psst, he says. Come see. It's almost as though every cell in your body rises to resist the command at once. Your mind is hijacked by the spirit of some distant ancestor who remembers what it's like to be chased through the mountains by wolves and bears. You know it in your bones, marrow deep, that if you go up into that treehouse, something terrible is going to happen. Your friend clearly doesn't share your reservation. Before you can stop him, perhaps eager to prove his machismo in front of you, he starts climbing the ladder up into the treehouse. You can't watch this. To your terrible shame, you turn and run, out of the woods, out of the park, and all the way home, knowing in your heart that you avoided a terrible fate. And that's when you remember where you saw that kid's face, on a missing persons poster tacked onto the bulletin board outside your school. The next day, your curiosity carries you back there. Lord only knows why. Maybe there's just something you're meant to see. Or maybe you even want to prove that you really did see that treehouse, or comfort yourself with the knowledge that you didn't. But when you arrive, it's still there, just as you remember it. Then you hear it. Psst! You look up to the treehouse, suddenly aware of the tightness in your throat. Your friend is staring out of the treehouse, with the same oddly blank expression that the kid yesterday had. Psst! Your friend says. Come see. It's SCP-974, the Treehouse Predator. The dim emergency lights and alarms did little to deter Eddie as he swiped the keycard he had stolen. At that moment, it didn't matter to him if he got caught. He'd found them. The SCP Foundation. They were real. And now he could prove it. He wouldn't be a disgraced former investigative journalist anymore. No, this would make him a formerly disgraced investigative journalist. It might even win him a Pulitzer for exposing this shadowy organization to the world. He just had to grab some photos and escape before the security team managed to figure out where he was. He was in a small control room, emptied out since Eddie had tripped the emergency evacuation alarm. It was drab and gray, in keeping with the monotone aesthetic of the rest of the facility. Eddie's eyes were instinctively drawn towards a CCTV monitor, displaying the feed from a security camera trained on a corridor. It looked like it was nearby. In fact, Eddie could see the door out of this control room just at the furthest edge of the frame. Just as he was about to turn away, something caught his eye. He was certain he saw movement on the screen. Right there, in the corner of his vision. Eddie looked back at it. Nothing. The image was still. Then he blinked and saw a body. Eddie bolted out of the control room and sprinted down the corridor, heading straight for the spot he'd seen on the camera feed. When he arrived, he froze. The area was empty. There was nothing there. He was certain he'd seen something on the monitor. A headless corpse sat in the corner directly in front of the security camera. Even under the faint emergency light, it was clear there was nothing there. Unconvinced, he held up his own camera, the flashbulb illuminating the area for a split second. He checked the photo. Still no body. But there was something else. The flash briefly illuminated something lurking down the adjacent corridor. On the camera's tiny screen, Eddie could barely make out its shape. Ice-cold sweat trickled down his neck as he steadied his trembling hands and aimed the camera again. The flash fired, lighting up the corridor almost all the way to the far end. It had only been lit for a second, but Eddie saw for himself there was nothing there. But the picture showed otherwise. Whatever down that corridor was getting further away, and despite his terror, Eddie felt compelled to go after it. It was the proof he'd been looking for, disregarding that whatever it was might kill him. Taking cautious steps, with each firing of the flash he'd seen a shadowy shape, some nightmarish creature that wasn't in front of him, but appeared in the photos. And with every picture, the terror and tension he felt got worse. Suddenly, a noise, footsteps coming towards him from out of the dark corridor. Eddie felt panic drenching him like a splash of freezing water. There were too many steps for a creature with 2 legs. It was coming after him. The thing in the photos had realized he was following it, and when it caught him. A few minutes later, Foundation personnel recovered an intruder, disgraced former investigative journalist Edward Bamford, who had broken into a containment facility housing an anomalous object. Bamford was found cowering in a corridor, covered in blood, trembling and unresponsive. Believed to be traumatized, he was staring at his camera. The bodies of 3 Foundation security officers lay nearby. Bamford had seemingly killed them with his bare hands in a fit of violent hysterics. Foundation personnel were instructed to deal with Bamford the same way as others affected by SCP-895. Team 1 was cleared to move in and capture the anomaly. All civilians, the ones who were still alive at least, had been detained and evacuated from the area around the mortuary. Command gave the word over their comms, instructing the team to move in. They filed into the lobby, the crunch of shattered glass under their steel-toed combat boots echoing in the hollow space. Team 1 moved in tight formation, falling in behind their commanding officer, T1 lead. Weapons were raised, safeties already off, ready for anything. The first room of the mortuary, the lobby, had been ransacked. What had once been the calming, if melancholic entrance to the funeral home almost looked like it had been hit by an explosion. The doors were hanging off their hinges, windows smashed, the glass strewn about the floor. Plants that once softened the morbid atmosphere of the mortuary now lay strewn across the carpet, their soil spilled in messy piles. Broken shards of their pots were scattered everywhere, evidence of the violent rage that had hurled them across the room. Some of the bigger fragments were stained red with streaks of blood, as though used as makeshift weapons. Needless to say, something far worse than the typical macabre business of a morgue had happened here. The team continued through the mortuary, performing a careful sweep of each room. It was hard to tell the difference between the corpses that should have been still resting in their caskets and the fresh ones strewn about each room. There had been 2 services running when the incident broke out. two separate groups of civilians suddenly turning into wild animals and attacking each other. Their deceased loved ones were tipped over, tumbling out of their coffins onto the floor as distant relatives began lashing out at each other, some violently bludgeoning the closest person with whatever objects they could find. Command radioed in, having been monitoring the live feeds from Team 1's body cameras, observing the carnage left in the aftermath of the anomalous incident. There looked to be blood on the walls, a lot of blood, streaking up almost every surface in every room, reaching all the way up to splatter the ceilings. It was almost too much. It felt incongruent with the acts of physical violence that seemed to have taken place. Command contacted T1 lead, asking them to confirm the presence of the blood on the walls, but Team 1 couldn't see any at all. As they made their way through the mortuary, beyond the fact that the place had been trashed, there was nothing out of the ordinary, given that their body cam feeds were clearly showing otherwise. Command quickly put together what was likely going on. They warned Team 1 to proceed with caution, suspecting mimetic properties might be at play in the area. Sure enough, as the recovery team advanced towards the back of the funeral home, the blood on the walls seemed to vanish from their screens, fading with each step closer to the storage area. Opening the door and filing inside, the team found a dingy back room. The rest of the building had been lit with warm light to provide mourning families with a sense of comfort as they said farewell to their loved ones. Back here, only the dull, clinical flicker of fluorescent filaments blinked overhead, casting a cold light over the object the team was looking for. Unsurprisingly, given their current setting, it was a coffin. Little besides its ornate oak wood set it apart from any of the others within the mortuary. But watching the body cam feeds, Command were certain that they saw the object moving, as if it was alive. Team 1 couldn't see any movement. The coffin appeared to be normal. At T1 leads his command, T2 moved forward to open the wooden box, while the rest of the team readied their weapons. With a creak of its hinges, the coffin lid opened. It was empty. Not one of the team flinched, keeping their guns trained on the vacant space inside. They hadn't known exactly what to expect. Two of them had even held a bet that the anomalous coffin would contain a vampire, with one now expected to fork over his promised $50. T1 lead radioed back to command, confirming that the coffin was definitively empty. But instead of an order to secure the object and return it to the Foundation, over the comms came the sound of screaming and retching. Back at command, chaos had broken out. The same thing that had happened to the civilians in the mortuary was happening to them. Frantically, T1 lead ordered the coffin to be closed and commanded the rest of the team to retreat. When the SCP Foundation received a tip about unusual surveillance footage that had been captured at redacted mortuary, it certainly raised a few questions. The first being, why would a mortuary have security surveillance equipment installed? While combing through the records from redacted mortuary, the Foundation's data recovery team discovered that a recent spat of local vandalism had led the owners to install a network of security cameras. The system was designed to monitor the property after hours and capture any incidents in case of a tripped alarm during the night. These cameras provided coverage of the reception, the arranging room, and chapel areas, as well as a private office within the building. However, out of respect, no cameras were installed in rooms where families viewed the deceased. The footage was recorded onto a hard drive, which was then collected and reviewed by the SCP Foundation. It mostly consisted of visitors to the mortuary coming in or out of the reception, showing the manager completing paperwork in the office, and so on. Of course, the other important questions were, where did the anomalous coffin come from? There was no indication in the surveillance footage of exactly when the object arrived at the property, or if it was constructed on site. What is known, however, is that several Foundation video analysts reviewing the footage reported seeing abnormalities in the recordings. These seem to differ from person to person, with one stating that, at a certain point in the video footage, the walls of the mortuary seemed to be covered with the words "Get Out," written over and over in what looked to be blood. Another analyst refuted this, saying they had seen several dead human bodies lying on the floor of the reception in the footage. However, none of the people seen in the recordings seem aware of the presence of these corpses. Both analysts were submitted for evaluation and screened for evidence of psychosis. SCP-895 is, at least, when viewed with the naked eye, little more than an ornate oak coffin. Upon its discovery, several mortuary staff who had survived the strange incident of extreme violence were captured and questioned by SCP Foundation personnel. None of them were able to determine where the anomalous object had come from. Most of their responses indicated that it had been stored at the mortuary for some time, with no prior incidents until some time after the security cameras had been installed at the property. Functionally, SCP-895 is a memetic anomaly. Its anomalous properties only appear to affect any person who views or monitors the coffin remotely. This means that when interacting with it physically, SCP-895 remains non-anomalous. SCP-895 is believed to possess memetic properties that, through unknown means, severely disrupt photographic and video surveillance equipment. This effect extends to handheld recording devices, including smartphone cameras and various commercially available digital cameras and camcorders. It remains unclear if SCP-895's memetic effect also extends to audio recording equipment, such as microphones. However, in the interest of safety, these are also to be kept away from SCP-895. What is known for certain is that any recording device or any photos or video captured within 50 meters of SCP-895 will be affected by its disruptive properties. There remains some debate among the SCP Foundation's anomalous researchers as to the designation of SCP-895. Some simply believe that the coffin itself is the anomaly, and the source of the latent disruptive effect it has on cameras. Some researchers argue that SCP-895 itself may not be the source of the effect, but rather a manifestation of a memetic phenomenon. This disruption has so far only been observed in the vicinity of the coffin recovered by the Foundation. As a result, many who subscribe to this school of thought have taken to referring to SCP-895 not as an anomalous coffin, but as an intangible memetic anomaly, simply referred to as camera disruption. The severity of SCP-895's effects were observed directly by the Foundation upon its discovery. The memetic disruption of SCP-895 affected the video being received from command by the recovery team's body-mounted cameras. Following the incident, the Foundation had witnessed firsthand that the anomaly did not only affect pre-recorded footage taken within a set radius of the coffin, but was also capable of disrupting video feeds broadcasted live as well. The disruption itself manifests as abnormalities within the video, creating vivid and often deeply disturbing hallucinations to those viewing any footage captured within the vicinity of SCP-895. In the case of the recovery incident, Foundation personnel reported seeing blood on the walls within redacted mortuary, as well as believing the coffin itself to be alive and moving. Any differentiations in these hallucinations were not recorded, though it's possible other staff overseeing the recovery mission from the command center experienced different but graphic imagery. None of the personnel viewing the live body cam feed from Recovery Team 1 were able to describe their hallucinations, as the command center quickly descended into violent hysteria. The intensity of the hallucinations by camera disruption seems to increase at a rate that corresponds to the camera recording device's proximity to the anomalous coffin. The closer one gets, the worse the effects. Within a radius of 5 meters, any footage captured can not only trigger more disturbed hallucinations, but will inevitably result in severe psychological trauma in the viewer. This referred to as SCP-895's red zone, given the danger it presents. While individuals standing near the coffin are not directly affected by the hallucinations, any live or recorded footage observed from this proximity can induce severe psychological trauma and distress. During the recovery incident, the effects of this trauma on the command center were so severe that the damage done to personnel was irreversible. Those who survived were screened and given full assessments by anomalous psychiatric experts. The members of staff who were still responsive remained unaware that they had snapped and murdered their fellow co-workers in the command center. Others remained too manic to provide any responses. In the wake of another incident, which resulted in the deaths of 3 members of personnel, the red zone surrounding SCP-895 was extended from 5 meters to 10. In order to prevent incidents like this in the future, the SCP Foundation has since deemed it necessary to remove any member of personnel affected by SCP-895 from the site it is held at. Should the severity of their symptoms warrant it, termination of these individuals has been authorized. SCP-895 has been relocated to a sealed, isolated underground containment cell, situated at approximately 100 meters below ground level. Here, no one can observe it through the use of cameras or microphones.
as no surveillance equipment of any kind is to be brought within the red zone radius of SCP-895. This may only be done with the express permission of at least 2 members of Level 3 personnel. Given that the memetic effects of SCP-895 are dependent on distance, a security camera has been installed at a corridor junction, located at a 30-meter distance from the object's containment cell. SCP Foundation researchers continue to study the effects of the object by viewing this footage in rotating shifts to limit exposure. Security personnel are also to follow the same precaution, alternating every 4 hours to lessen the potential psychological impact of camera disruption. Recorded hallucinations appearing on this feed have included the following: the words "Get Out" written in blood on the corridor walls, an unidentified headless body slumped in a chair in the corner of the junction. The missing head lay a few feet away, at the end of a dark, smeared trail of blood. The floor of the junction opening up to reveal a deep red light that fills the surrounding area. The coffin itself standing in the junction, as if the object has somehow moved freely out of containment, and 5 unidentified bodies hanging from the ceiling, with only their legs in frame.
Hey folks, welcome back to SCP Explained. Sorry if I seem a little out of it today. Truth be told, I've been having real trouble sleeping lately. Perhaps it's because I spend so much time pouring through the files of the SCP Foundation archive. Also, I've been catching up on the West Wing. There's plenty of creatures, entities, objects, and tales that are very effective at making you lose sleep, but none quite as effective as SCP-966. Grab yourself a pot of coffee and prop your eyelids open with some matchsticks or tape, because you need to stay alert if you want to survive this one. Though when you get on the wrong side of SCP-966, I'm sorry to tell you that your chances of survival are extremely low. And after experiencing its primary anomalous effects, the question of how long you'll even want to survive will become disturbingly prescient. Like many of our explorations into the living nightmares that the SCP Foundation deals with on a daily basis, the best way to experience exactly what SCP-966 can do is to take a look at a case study regarding one of its many unfortunate victims. In this case, that victim is a man named Terry Hallberg from New Mexico. In another life, perhaps Terry would have been an ideal candidate for a junior researcher position at the SCP Foundation. He was a scientific-minded truth seeker whose interests lied in the more esoteric fields of study, namely ghosts and aliens. Proving the existence of life in the stars and the supernatural in general was something he considered to be his life's work. This is why he moved to New Mexico, home of Roswell, and widely considered to be the UFO capital of the United States in the first place. There, he'd perform experiments on a wide range of bizarre phenomenon, from exploring haunted houses to obsessively watching the sky for any anomalous activity. He'd become a bigwig in his niche online paranormal investigation community, and his posts on the somewhat infamous Parawatch forum always garnered plenty of attention. But Terry wanted more. He wasn't in it for the fame, or the money, or the legions of insatiable paranormal investigator groupies. He was a true believer. He wanted a close, first-hand experience with the supernatural, and that was exactly what he was about to get, in addition to a very harsh lesson about being careful what you wish for. It began when he got called out to Albuquerque for a strange case of cattle mutilation. For those who don't frequent the Parawatch forums quite as often as Terry, cattle mutilation is the most common nickname for the phenomenon of large livestock, usually cows, being found dead with unusual mutilation patterns on their corpses. While the particulars of what exactly this means varies from believer to believer, with theories ranging from aliens to black helicopters, it is widely accepted across all branches of paranormal enthusiasts that when cattle are being mutilated, something very strange is afoot. Terry arrived at the ranch, and with the application of a little cash to grease the appropriate palms, he was able to conduct a recorded interview with the rancher. He was a weathered man in his early 60s, with a somewhat frantic demeanor and profoundly tired eyes. When Terry asked him if he'd experienced any unusual phenomenon in the days leading up to the cattle mutilation incident, he was surprisingly forthcoming about the hellish conditions he'd been experiencing lately. The strange experiences had been going on for several days now. It all started when the rancher noticed that a number of his cows weren't sleeping. This isn't the easiest thing to spot in a cow, because cattle engage in what is known as polyphasic sleep. where instead of sleeping for one prolonged period like humans typically do, they sleep in small intervals throughout a 24-hour period. Cows can even sleep standing up for periods of light rest, but during REM sleep, which all mammals need for healthy functioning, they lay down just like us. The problem was, in the last several days, many of the rancher's cows hadn't slept at all. It was after this that the rancher seemingly began to have bizarre paranormal experiences himself. It began with a general sense of unease and dread, which was soon followed by a sense of severe insomnia that had left him completely unable to sleep for the past 2 days. During this period, things had gotten worse. He'd experienced strange noises around his home, footsteps, what sounded like hushed voices, and occasionally even what could only be identified as a low, croaking growl. But it wasn't just noises. There was also physical evidence of some kind of intrusion. Items had been knocked over or moved. At one point, a glass of water, which had been centralized on a stable surface, had somehow fallen off the edge and shattered. The old rancher, with a trembling voice, even stated that he'd seen things moving in the corners of his eyes. Figures, shapes, little green men. And then, the cattle mutilation spree began. It may have sounded morbid, but Terry had to use everything in his power to stop himself from smiling ear to ear. While this was a terrifying experience for the rancher, for Terry, this was an absolutely textbook case of paranormal experience. And here he was, the very first person to document it all. It could be the next Skinwalker Ranch or Rendlesham Forest incident, and his name would forever be attached to it. He asked the rancher if he could see the cow's body, and the rancher obliged. Whatever had caused this, alien, ghost, or otherwise, had really done a number on this cow. Good portions of its abdomen had been torn away, with evidence of what appeared to be biting and clawing. This poor beast had been eaten alive. While exploring the wounds with a magnifying glass, a scalpel, and a large pair of tweezers, Terry discovered something incredible. Something frankly unprecedented for a cattle mutilation case. A piece of evidence left behind directly by whatever had perpetrated this act of gruesome violence. A long, thin, and exceedingly sharp claw, around 12 centimeters in length and broken at one end. New Mexico's large predators included mountain lions, black bears, bobcats, and coyotes, and this claw was nothing like any of those. In fact, it was nothing like Terry had ever seen before. Was this his big moment? Had he discovered evidence of an entirely new supernatural creature or a specimen of extraterrestrial life? He was practically vibrating with excitement about this new discovery. After thanking and paying the rancher again, Terry took some photos, gathered some more samples, and left. He had everything he needed to conduct a groundbreaking investigation into the supernatural. Just wait until the folks on Parawatch heard about this. In all his excitement, as he drove back home from the ranch, he never once stopped to consider what he might be bringing back with him. But really, in the end, it didn't even matter. From the moment he stepped onto that ranch, Terry Hallberg was already doomed. He just didn't know it yet. He arrived home and began to record all of his information onto one master document. He also began obsessively assembling outside research, hoping to find similar cases that he could add to this emerging pattern. It was a mix of phenomenon from both hauntings and alien encounters. Could this possibly be some form of alien ghost? The dream find of every paranormal investigator. Terry had to still his racing heart as the possibilities bombarded his mind. He could have been working with the paranormal find of the century here. In fact, he was so excited by all of this, he didn't even realize that he worked through the entire night. He didn't sleep a wink. After all, how could you, when such important research needed to be done? The burst of nocturnal energy felt like a godsend. The next night, not so much. In the meantime, Terry had compiled his information together enough to present it to his esteemed paranormal colleagues on the Parawatch forums. They were startled and amazed by what they were seeing and hearing, especially the taped interview with the rancher and the mysterious claw. One of Terry's closest associates, who went by the username John Station, pulled up a similar bizarre case of a Los Angeles hiker who died in the hills. In the days before his death, his family and friends reported him complaining about insomnia and experiencing an increasing state of paranoia and distress. He started taking long walks across remote trails in hopes of tiring himself out enough to finally get some sleep, but that time never came. When his corpse was found, it was mauled and half-eaten. Everyone assumed that a mountain lion had killed him, and other scavengers had fed on him before his body was found. But now, Terry wasn't so sure. The more they looked into it,
the more they found strange and unpleasant deaths connected to people suffering from what seemed like severe insomnia. Despite its debilitating effects, the only type of insomnia that directly causes death is the exceedingly rare genetic condition fatal familial insomnia, which couldn't account for the sheer number of deaths the Parawatch team were finding. In their minds, there was only one reasonable conclusion. The deaths weren't the result of the insomnia itself, but whatever was causing it. It was only then that Terry noticed his own inability to sleep, and his previous excitement was gradually replaced with panic. At first, he tried to keep it all in proportion, knowing that it's easy to invent things to fear when you're in uncharted territory. But as the days passed and the sleep never came, his worry became unassailable. Terry knew that he hadn't just discovered a new paranormal phenomenon, he was becoming one of its victims. He became increasingly paranoid over the next few days, taking constant EVP readings from around his apartment in hopes of detecting whatever was around him. There were strange noises, frightening noises. He just knew it. But little did poor Terry know, there was a very good reason he couldn't detect his tormentors. While he had been in his apartment for days now, he had no hope of ever seeing them. The human eye's spectrum of visible light is around 380 to 750 nanometers, but the monsters who deprived him of his ability to sleep existed somewhere around 900. They were entirely undetectable to the human eye, and they were waiting for their latest meal. As the insomnia grew worse, Terry received some frightening news. That rancher who he'd spoken to a few days before was found dead on his property, with severe injuries comparable to that of a wild animal attack. Just like his cattle, and just like all the other strange cases the Parawatch Forum had found, first the insomnia, then the frightening paranormal experiences, and then Terry felt something warm and wet trickling down the back of his neck. He probably would have realized it was his own blood, if a 20-centimeter claw, just like the one he had pulled out of the dead cow, hadn't just pierced his brainstem. Terry Hallberg had finally gotten what he wanted, a first-hand experience with the supernatural, and all he had to do was die. But in his defense, being saved from SCP-966, a whole species of monsters known as the Sleep Killers, is almost worse than being killed by them. When they release their deadly energy pulse, their primary anomalous effect, which induces sleeplessness on anyone or anything in their immediate 20-meter radius, the effects are permanent. They essentially induce fatal insomnia, and your only options are to die by their claws or live long enough to see your own body and mind give out from the horrible effects of true sleep deprivation. They travel in pairs, and because of their invisibility, you never know when they're lurking around you, waiting to rob you of your sleep and then your life. The Foundation currently has 4 specimens in containment, but believe us, there are a lot more out there, and they're hungry. Sleep tight, if you can.
Researcher Martin pushed the deck against the door, hoping it would hold long enough for him to find an alternate escape route. He wasn't thinking about the long term. He couldn't afford to. With the Foundation's global reach, he'd never truly escape them, never be able to make it away, condemned to spend the rest of his life on the run from the organization he'd devoted his life to. It was too overwhelming to even attempt to reckon with that, especially with the pounding of a fist against the door. He scrabbled around, opening windows to try and see if there was a safe way down. Technically, none of this was his fault, at least in his mind. The administrative login information he'd used to access the file shouldn't have been left so easy to find. That was just poor cybersecurity on the Foundation's part. Researcher Martin had been tasked with compiling information on SCP-001, one of the most infamous anomalies ever encountered in the Foundation's long and storied history, or multiple of them at least. What Martin had come to learn was there were numerous entities within the Foundation's files that all acted as proposals for SCP-001. Some were creatures, the typical kind of anomalous entities the Foundation dealt with on a regular basis, but some of the proposals focused on more abstract anomalies, and somehow, those were more existentially terrifying than any evil godlike being bent on destroying reality. Theories about the very source of anomalies themselves, that their very existence might have been predetermined by some otherworldly force. Then there were the other proposals that named parts of the Foundation as the true SCP-001. Those seemed to suck Researcher Martin in like a vortex, dragging him down a deep, dark rabbit hole that made him start to question everything he thought he knew about working for the SCP Foundation, and the one that had toppled him into a full-blown conspiracy-obsessed stupor that there was no coming back from: the Noir Box Proposal. The weighted head of a battering ram splintered the wooden surface of the door, spraying fragments over the room. The table propped up to keep it shut toppled under the force of the entry as a squad of shadowy figures in full black combat gear rushed inside. The mobile task force surrounded the cowering researcher, keeping their weapons trained on him. Researcher Martin, pleading for his life, started gesturing to the walls of the room around him that had been plastered with hastily scrawled diagrams and equations. Martin tried desperately to find some concise, easy-to-understand way of explaining to the soldiers what he'd uncovered. They only picked up on a few words like many worlds hypothesis and splitting universes, but ultimately they didn't follow what he was saying and weren't sent there to hear him out. All the MTF had been told was that researcher Martin had breached Foundation security and now posed a risk of exposing sensitive information about SCP-001. There was only one path of recourse: termination. However, unbeknownst to them, Dr. Martin was fine. At least a version of him was. One who never learned about the Noir Box Proposal for SCP-001 and hadn't gone mad trying to unravel its mysteries. Instead, he was a respected higher-ranking member of the Foundation who was alive and well, in a completely different timeline. The formation of the SCP Foundation has always been shrouded in mystery, with nobody really knowing what the true origin of the organization is, and what is merely just a cover story left in the archives to keep the truth hidden. SCP-001, the Noir Box Proposal at least, might hold the answers to the questions surrounding how the Foundation came to be. 3 times over. Known as the Tindalo's Trinity, the file pertaining to this anomaly is buried deep in the SCP Foundation's database, under layers upon layers of encryption and security clearance requirements. It requires someone at the very top level of the Foundation to access, a member of either the Overseer Council or the Foundation's High Command, or Overwatch. But wait, what are those? Aren't they the same thing? Well, yes and no. The exact name of the high-ranking secretive group that runs the Foundation has often been interchangeable, whether they're known as the O5 Council, the Overseer Council, etc. But what if it wasn't just many different names for the same governing body, but actually separate names for alternate versions of the ones who control the SCP Foundation? Allow us to explain. All 3 of these groups, the Overseer Council, High Command, and Overwatch, have come to a consensus that SCP-001 is an anomaly that connects with the Foundation's very origin. They believe that the founder of the SCP Foundation, also known as SCP-001, was anomalous in some way that caused them to interact with time in an unusual fashion. The triumvirate of councils are in agreement that around the time that the SCP Foundation was formed, 3 distinct timelines were generated, given the anomalous nature of the organization's founder. Each of these timelines drastically altered the nature of SCP-001, featuring a different version in each one. In the first, commonly known as Timeline HC, where the Foundation is run by a High Command, SCP-001 was an anomalous human corpse. This timeline's SCP-001 still exhibited all the behavioral characteristics of a normal human being, but could additionally replicate itself at an erratic, uncontrollable rate, usually when performing tasks that could have multiple possible outcomes. SCP-001 in Timeline HC also interacted anachronistically with its environment, passing through solid matter that predated it or would outlast it. So it had to be contained in a room that was constructed before it existed as an anomaly. This timeline's SCP-001 was responsible for conceiving the idea for the SCP Foundation, and was able to promote a significant interest in the organization. However, they were assassinated before the Foundation was officially codified, with the culprits being a version of Mobile Task Force ALP-0, who are believed to have originated from either of the other 2 timelines. While this seems to have been done to deter the Foundation forming in this timeline, it seems to have had the opposite effect. Despite the assassination of SCP-001 occurring before the official formation of the SCP Foundation in Timeline HC, this version of the Foundation was successfully codified by the 13 members of what they referred to as High Command. Given the anomalous circumstances around the death of SCP-001, it provided a catalyst for the organization to immediately establish itself as this timeline's protection against the threat posed by anomalous entities. The body of SCP-001 was placed in the building that had been its childhood home, securing it somewhere that predated them to negate their anomalous properties. This made them the first anomaly contained by Timeline HC's version of the SCP Foundation, posthumously garnering them the official designation of SCP-001. So that's the first of our 3 timelines at play. The events that unfold in the second are considerably different. In this timeline, Timeline OC, the Foundation was initially created by a different SCP-001. This entity, referred to primarily as the Founder, appropriately enough, was a human being known to possess anomalous temporal abilities. The Founder was known to also be immortal, showing no visible signs of aging, and with a resistance to external damage that prevented him from being directly killed. Any injuries he sustained could be healed, but only at the same rate typical of an average human being. The temporal side of his anomalous properties pertained to predicting the future. The Founder was able to, with an inarguable level of precision and accuracy, forecast events before they occurred. His foresight, it appeared to the Foundation, was not inciting these events to happen as he predicted them. However, everything he ever predicted would occur became an inevitability, impossible to delay, avert, or alter through any means. During the events of Timeline OC, and as his preferred nickname implies, the Founder was the sole figure responsible for establishing this version of the SCP Foundation. In this course of events, the O5 Council of this timeline were known as the Overseer Council. It was, however, while he was in the process of establishing the organization that things started to go awry. Whether he was able to predict this occurrence or not is unknown, although it seems to have corresponded with the MTF-ALP-0 assassination of SCP-001 in the other timeline, Timeline HC. In Timeline OC, at the same time as the assassination in Timeline HC, the Founder began to exhibit his anomalous temporal properties in front of the original members of Overseer Council. However, it should also be noted that there was no recorded presence of MTF-ALP-0 in Timeline OC. Believing the Founder to be a potential danger to the Foundation they had all helped to create, the founding Overseer Council classified him as an anomalous threat. They immediately devised a set of containment measures for the Founder, now designating him as SCP-001, the first anomaly contained by this timeline's version of the Foundation. He was placed within a standard humanoid containment cell and given regular meals, while personnel were forbidden to communicate with him. Given his role in establishing the Foundation in this version of events, SCP-001 is, naturally, in favor of containing and analyzing anomalies. However, not when that includes him, and insisted that he be released. According to one of his predictions for forthcoming events, he requested to be allowed to build a device, but refused to elaborate on the intended purpose of it. SCP-001 even refused to allow other members of Foundation personnel to construct the device on his behalf for testing purposes. The third of these timelines is referred to as Timeline OW, wherein the leading body of the Foundation are known as Overwatch. Here, just like the previous iterations of its history, the description of SCP-001 and their role in forming the SCP Foundation differs. In this timeline, SCP-001 is an anomaly that consists of 2 distinct parts. The first of these is a figure not dissimilar from the Founder. Referred to as SCP-001-1, this person is also a functionally immortal human, who doesn't age and can't heal rapidly from damage. SCP-001-1 also advocates for securing and analyzing anomalies. However, this includes himself, as he doesn't object to his own containment, or that of the second component of this SCP-001. Known as SCP-001-A, this device is capable of accurately calculating any and all possible outcomes of any event that is input into it. Unlike the Founder, who seemed to possess a foresight able to predict the only inevitable outcome of the future, SCP-001-A is able to account for the possibility of multiple potential futures, even down to accounting for how its own predictions could potentially influence or alter outcomes. In layman's terms, at least one of the eventualities predicted by SCP-001-A will always be accurate. unless the predictions are to do with its own future, or the future of SCP-001-1. In this instance, the device will always produce one of two assumptions that are incorrect. Either that SCP-001-1 was killed after an assassination attempt and never constructed SCP-001-A, but that's impossible after all. SCP-001-A exists. It's already been made in this timeline. The other incorrect prediction it can give is that SCP-001-1 also exhibits the same anomalous properties as the prediction machine, more akin to the founder, and that SCP-001-A was never constructed in the first place. But again, that can't be right, in this timeline anyway. According to records within Timeline OW, their version of the Founder, who is of course SCP-001-1, encountered a version of Mobile Task Force ALP-0 from one of the other timelines. They presented the Founder of the OW timeline with detailed blueprints for the construction of SCP-001-A. The device's completion coincided with the assassination in Timeline HC, and the corresponding anomalous incident in Timeline OC. After this point, MTF-ALP-0 departs from Timeline OW. This version of the SCP Foundation is then created to study the device, SCP-001-A, with this founder and a group of his close friends, who would become this Foundation's Overwatch. Following this initial research group's discovery of other anomalous phenomenon that threatened the rest of society, the team's goal expanded to research anomalies and protect the world from the danger they posed. However, the rest of the Overwatch began to age at a natural rate. While the founder didn't recognize this, he volunteered to be contained and studied, thus becoming a component of this timeline's SCP-001. Stepping back and looking at all of these timelines, there seems to be a number of marked similarities, particularly relating to how the Foundation was established and how a figure, usually the one who founded the organization, possessed anomalous means of interacting with time and temporality. Under normal circumstances, interaction between alternate timelines should be impossible. But the preservation of information about all three on the SCP Foundation's database has somehow enabled all three timelines to communicate with each other. Through exchanging intelligence via their own versions of the database, all three iterations of the Foundation across the three timelines have learned that almost all of the anomalies they have encountered since being established are exclusive to their own timeline. There are a total of 17 anomalies that have been confirmed to exist across the three timelines. But there is a concerning factor in all this: the presence of an anachronistic military group referring to itself as MTF-ALP-0. This Mobile Task Force's direct involvement in the events of both Timeline HC, where they assassinated SCP-001, and Timeline OW, where they provided schematics for SCP-001-A, raises an awful lot of questions. This MTF had to be acting on orders of the Foundation, but which version in which timeline? The consensus among the leading committees of all three, the High Command, Overseer Council, and Overwatch, is that at some unknown date in the future, each of them will inevitably send their own version of MTF-ALP-0 back in time to alter the Foundation's past. And in a sense, they've already done it, and seen how this altered the circumstances in order to inadvertently create the Foundation. But this poses the risk of one of these timelines overriding another, thus meaning all information garnered by alternate iterations of the Foundation could be lost. So, putting their heads together, these Foundation leading committees come to the conclusion that they need to attempt to merge all three timelines. And it seems the way to do so is using the device that Timeline OC's founder wanted to build, and that Timeline OW's founder was able to construct. This device is how this proposal for SCP-001 was given its nickname, the Noir Box. The intention of the Noir Box is to shunt all three timelines into a stable joint path, like turning loose strands into a single length of twine. As such, the leading committees of all three different timelines have agreed to share their intel on how each of them can safely create their own Noir Boxes, and all three will be used to merge the timelines. Every member of High Command, the Overseer Council, and Overwatch sign off on it, but whether or not the plan works is another matter. The fabric of time is delicate, and one wrong move could tear everything apart. Growing up in a small Virginia town near the mountains right on the border of West Virginia, Zane heard all kinds of stories from his grandmother. Tales of mountain lions who could transform into ghostly women. The Talipo, a fluffy rodent-like creature on an endless quest to get its tail back from the hunter who took it. The Mothman that appeared with glowing red eyes to warn of impending tragedy. Most of all, she warned him about the deer. "Sometimes," she used to say, "when you're out in the woods late at night, you'll see a deer acting a little bit funny. Maybe it's making strange sounds. Maybe it's standing up like a man. Maybe it's staring at you from the shadows and won't look away. If you ever see one of these deer, promise me you'll get away from it as fast as possible. Don't look at it, don't talk to it, just get far, far away." He promised her every time, but as he got older, he started to forget his grandma's stories, letting them fade away with memories of the Easter Bunny and Santa Claus. He didn't think about the stories again until he was older, a junior in college and embarking on a camping trip with his roommate Josh. They were both staying with Zane's family for the summer and had been enjoying the sunshine and fresh air. They'd gone hiking, picked blackberries, and gone fishing to their heart's content. After a while, they got sick of sleeping in the cramped house and decided to have a proper camping trip out in the mountains. Campsites were crowded this time of year, but Zane knew a spot just isolated enough that they could kick back, enjoy nature, and relax in peace. They packed their supplies and headed out into the forest for a weekend they would never forget. By nightfall, Zane and Josh had pitched their tents, built a fire, and were starting to make some dinner. They roasted hot dogs and heated cans of beans over the fire, and decided to start telling some classic scary stories. Sitting by the crackling fire, listening to the rustling leaves, snapping twigs, and the chittering of animals all around, Zane couldn't help but remember the stories he had almost forgotten. All of the strange, inexplicable things that came out after the sun went down and the forest went quiet. He thought he could hear the footsteps of something walking by their campsite, circling them, but it was probably just his imagination. As Josh told stories about babysitters stalked by killers and drivers picking up ghostly hitchhikers, Zane was thinking about the deer. He shuddered but shook it off, and after some more stories and a few too many s'mores, the two friends decided to get some sleep. After several hours, Zane woke to the sound of Josh unzipping his tent. He sat up, ready to yell at his friend for waking him up, but the sight of Josh's pale, frightened face stopped him. "There's something here," was all Josh could say. His hands, Zane noticed, were shaking. "Hey man, it's okay, let's check it out." Zane patted Josh on the shoulder. He was pretty sure his friend just wasn't used to camping in actual nature, but reached for his hunting knife just in case. He grabbed a flashlight and switched it on. Following Josh out into the darkness, he swept the beam across the clearing, and it illuminated a pair of orange eyes staring directly at him from behind a nearby tree. "What the?" He approached the shape, trying to get a clear look at it. As it became more illuminated, his stomach dropped. It was a deer, but something was wrong with it. Its mouth was wide open, its jaw working up and down like it was trying to make a sound, but nothing came out. But that wasn't the worst part. As the flashlight beam illuminated the animal's body, Zane realized that somehow its head was on backwards. "What the?" Josh appeared behind him, gasping. "Shh!" Zane shushed him intensely. He suddenly remembered his grandmother's warnings. "You know what? I don't feel so great. I think we should go back to the car and head to my place." He gave Josh a look, shaking his head as if to say, "Don't say another word." By the glow of their flashlights, the two packed up their campsite, all under the gaze of the misshapen deer. They drove home in silence, Josh only speaking once to ask, "What was that thing?" Zane shook his head. "I don't know, but it wasn't a deer." They crept back into the house and went to bed. They knew they would never speak of tonight ever again. As Zane began to drift off to sleep, his last conscious thought was to glance out the window. There in the yard, not 5 feet away, was a deer, watching. He didn't know it, but that night Zane encountered an instance of SCP-6448. SCP-6448 is an anomalous species of creatures that appear to belong to the Cervidae family, nicknamed the Not Deer. They are highly intelligent and can be distinguished from ordinary deer by unusual behavior and physical deformities. Some of these have included legs that bend backwards, the eyes of an animal other than deer, forward-facing eyes, jerky movements, lack of fear towards humans, and walking on 2 hind legs. Most notably and most frightening, SCP-6448 instances will watch and stalk humans for a duration of hours or even days. They will follow humans home and steal items from their domains, including weapons, food, and other personal items. They're most frequently found in the deep woods at night, when a person is completely alone. If someone encounters an instance of SCP-6448, if they acknowledge any of the creature's anomalous traits, it will attack. In order to limit the loss of life and ensure that the SCP Foundation employees exercise the utmost caution when dealing with SCP-6448, the Cryptozoology Division issued the following guidelines. If you notice a deer that seems off, look away and ignore it. If it knows that you've noticed it, it's too late. If you hear your name, whistling, or something else in the woods calling for you, don't acknowledge it. Never acknowledge it exists. Don't respond. Don't go looking for it. Don't call back to it. If you're walking at night and you feel something breathing on your neck or whispering behind you, the key to your safety is pretending that everything is normal. Your survival is dependent on your ignorance. Whatever SCP-6448 is, they appear to be intelligent enough to understand when they are being studied, and they don't seem to like it very much. On January 11, 1994, a group of 3 SCP-6448 instances broke into Site 41 in North Carolina, using a tunnel they had carved over a long period of time. At the time, there was an instance in containment, but in all of the chaos of the breach, the specimen was lost. Every time an instance was captured and contained near SCP-6448's habitat, it would later escape via similar tunnels. SCP-6448 was officially classified by the SCP Foundation in 1980, but those from the Appalachian region have known about these strange creatures since at least 1947. From folktales and campfire stories to secondhand and even first-hand encounters, the locals are aware of the not deer's existence and are largely familiar with the precautions necessary to avoid them. Though many of the civilians that encounter SCP-6448 avoid notifying the authorities, there have been several recorded 911 calls involving the not deer since 2000. The following is a log of those calls. February 1, 2000. Victim, age 41 female, dialed emergency services after hearing their name being called from the woods near their home. The victim recounts the vocalization being likened to a scream in a voice that they do not recognize, and requested assistance in locating the source. Emergency personnel requested the subject place their phone on the floor outside the home to listen for the alleged sounds. After 2 minutes, a vocalization was heard that was calling to the subject by name, emanating from the nearby forest. The subject was instructed to investigate the disturbance themselves and keep services updated on the situation. The victim then began to walk into the woodland, getting about 50 meters into the underbrush before inexplicably stopping. They claim there to be a noticeably large deer standing in the way of the path. She begins to walk closer, though states it does not move. Subject diverts from the path and begins walking in a different direction. After 30 minutes, no source of the voice is determined. The caller returns to their residence. June 13, 2002. Victim, age 28 male, calls 911 regarding a home break-in. The caller notes numerous items to be missing from their residence and requests an investigation. Operators dispatch 2 investigators to visit the home and pertain a potential perpetrator. The pair note that based on earlier CCTV images, all cutlery, sharp objects, firearms, light bulbs, and a single copy of the novel The Day After Roswell are missing. Also noted is that there is a complete lack of any fingerprints at the scene, with no doors or windows having been broken into. Analysis of the home's CCTV footage revealed there to be a 2-hour period of missing film, with the exception of a single frame containing a Servus nippon on its hind legs reaching towards the camera. Its frontal hooves have been warped to resemble fingers. No footage of the entity exiting the home was discovered. November 19, 2005. A cattle farmer, age 54 male, reported to local authorities the sudden disappearance of over 30% of his largest herd. Response teams searched the nearby area for 4 hours, though found no trace of his cattle. The victim was recommended to set up trail cameras and note any unusual activity overnight. At 1:11 a.m., 2 SCP-6448 are seen walking through the field before fleeing. One places an object into the ground, later discovered to be a single fork. A week after this discovery, 200 discarded bovine hooves appear at the location. March 4th, 2009. Victim, age unknown, gender unknown, dials 911 to request assistance from animal services. The victim is standing within a forest in front of a service elephas, which is violently contorting. The victim attempts to state, "You better get a vet or something, I don't think it's well," before a piercing screech is heard and the line falls silent. Recovered footage depicts the aforementioned animal squirming, seemingly in pain. A vicious churning is audible as a black mass erupts out of the instance, and the video turns to static. October 11th, 2012. Victim, age 23 male, is a junior wildlife officer at the Cherokee National Forest, Tennessee. They radio their supervisor in the early morning regarding a herd of Odocoleus virginius within the reserve. Supposedly, there is a single animal that, upon first glance, appears average, though possesses divergent attributes, including backwards joints, enlarged abdomen, and forward-facing eyes. Upon stating this, a distant whistle is audible, and the victim stumbles slightly. They begin to say, "What the? Did it just whistle at me?" before the sound of hooves rapidly getting closer is heard. Notably, the hoofsteps did not sound to be in the traditional gallop of a cervid. October 12, 2012. The former victim's supervisor calls authorities following the victim's absence from the reserve night shift. Following this, their radio begins to crackle. The victim's voice can be heard on the other end, and he requests the supervisor's attention. He calls regarding a herd of Odocoleus virginius within the reserve. They claim there is a single animal that upon first glance appears average, though possesses divergent attributes including backwards joints, enlarged abdomen, and forward-facing eyes. Suspecting the creature to be a rare genetic malformation, the victim requests their supervisor to come to the location. The supervisor questions the victim about what happened the night previous. There is no reply. Upon the supervisor's and law enforcement's arrival at the site, a herd of approximately 80 Odocoleus virginius was present. A single entity is in the field's center and appears to be standing separate from the rest of the group. It flees the scene upon realizing the law enforcement's presence. Where it formerly stood lay a standard two-way radio. April 8, 2016. Victim, age 35 female, dials 911 using a satellite phone distressed. They state they are in redacted county woods and are being followed. She claims that despite seeing no one for the duration of her hike, she, quote, feels as if she's being watched and has heard someone walking behind her at various points in the trip. The victim is unable to give an adequate description of their location, but knows the route to return to her residence. Operators request the victim to return to a point wherein she can provide a sufficient geographic description of her position. The victim remains on the line for the duration of the hike back to a readily used portion of the wilderness trail. Along the journey, various unnatural sounds can be heard. These include footsteps, rock slides, coughing, whispering, and whistling. Nearing the main trail, all woodland noises such as birds and wind cease suddenly, and the victim states she can see a malformed deer carcass coated in a thick layer of black slime. At this time, human screams can be heard in the distance. Operators request the victim continue and ignore the other stimuli. Agents embedded in local law enforcement, suspecting SCP-6448 involved, notify Gamma-4 to the situation. 20 minutes later, the victim returns to the main trail. Gamma-4, now operating the 911 call, informs the victim not to respond to any further unusual activity and briefly outlines service protocol. For the duration of the victim's journey to her home, 2 sets of breathing are audible. The victim successfully returns to her residence and shuts the door behind her. Now out of sight from SCP-6448, agents inquire of the victim's address, and the victim promptly complies. Operatives instruct the victim to have possession of all firearms and weapons on the premises and to barricade herself inside a safe space with one exit point. The victim swiftly begins grabbing all available weapons and throwing them inside a wardrobe. It is at this time there's a knock on the front door. The victim does not respond and continues to hoard sharp objects from kitchen drawers. The knocking becomes more violent as the handle is jostled and is shaken incessantly. A voice on the other side repeats the phrase, "Hello, it is me. Hello, let me in a calm manner as the door begins to shake. The victim retreats to her wardrobe, armed with a small firearm. Upon sealing herself in the space, the knocking ceases, and footsteps can be heard becoming further away. The sound of galloping is audible as the front door caves in. Hoofsteps can now be heard inside the home. The entity continues to repeat, "Hello, it is me. Hello, let me in," as it searches the small building. A bright light flashes overhead, seemingly circling the house. Eventually, the entity enters the victim's bedroom. Through a small slit in the wardrobe door, the victim can see a Cervus canadensis standing on its hind legs and surveying the room. Its movements are crooked and stiff, seeming to struggle to stand in a bipedal fashion. It slouches down to a quadrupedal crouch, similar to the stance of an arachnid. It inhales heavily, and its head locks on the view of the wardrobe. It is noted as possessing human eyes. It scampers towards the subject and opens the door. A single gunshot is heard. Responders found no trace of either SCP-6448 or the victim. Containment of SCP-6448 is focused on the investigation of any deer exhibiting anomalous traits in and around the Appalachian area. Any civilian sightings of SCP-6448 are to be handled by Mobile Task Force Gamma-4 or the Green Stags. Any possible deaths resulting from SCP-6448 will be blamed on hiking accidents, and any reported sightings can be explained away with chronic wasting disease. CWD, occasionally referred to as zombie deer disease, is a prion disease affecting members of the Cervidae family. Symptoms of the illness include loss of motor function control and damage to decision-making, as well as gradual degradation of all mental faculties. It is 100% fatal. However, though the disease does exist, most recorded cases of it in the Appalachian region can actually be attributed to instances of SCP-6448. Any captured instances of SCP-6448 should be transported to Site-44 for the Cryptozoology Division's containment and study. On November 29, 2019, they finally got their chance to bring a not deer into custody. The Green Stags were able to capture an instance of SCP-6448 with the help from MTF Nu 7 Hammerdown and their Heavy Vehicles Division, as well as some experimental shock rifles. One not deer was knocked unconscious in the conflict, and its body was loaded onto an armored helicopter and flown straight to Site-44 in Essex, England. At the site, it was then placed in a reinforced steel containment cell and heavily sedated. This entire process went off without a hitch. As the entity began to regain consciousness, cryptozoology specialist F. Oz watched it through a one-way glass window and attempted to speak to it through the intercom. "Greetings, SCP-6448, Researcher Oz began. At the sound of his voice, the creature jumped to its feet, staring at the intercom. "Can you understand me? We've seen your genus speak English just fine in the past." The animal did not answer, but began licking one of its legs and behaving as if it were an ordinary deer. Researcher Oz sighed impatiently. "Please, we know your secret." The not deer stopped what it was doing, freezing completely still as it listened to the words. "Admittedly, it wasn't exactly well kept. If you just look at yourself for more than a few seconds, it is very clear that you're not normal." At this, the creature, which had been facing away from the window, swiveled its neck 180 degrees, breaking its own spine with an audible crack. It stared unblinking at the window and directly at Researcher Oz. Oz turned to the containment staff, suddenly anxious. "I thought you said this was one way." The staff assured him that it was, and there was no way the not deer could see him. Still, its eyes were locked directly on his face. He shook off the sense of unease and continued his line of questioning. "Are you something imitating deer? It is clear that if so, you possess basic anatomical knowledge of them, though details are clearly faulty. In fact, a better question would be, how, if in fact you are not what you pretend to be?" The not deer opened its mouth at this, revealing unusually sharp teeth. It moved its jaw as if attempting to speak, but only a choking sound came out. Shall we move on?" Oz asked. "What I'm more concerned with here is why you take our people. Is it a vendetta? Spite? Food?" For the first time in the interview, the not deer blinked. It was an unnatural movement, forced and deliberate, like the creature was attempting to engage in an ordinary behavior rather than actually experiencing an involuntary impulse. "Responding is mandatory," Researcher Oz prompted. The creature did not react. "If you will not comply," Oz's tone grew stern, frustrated, "maybe you'd like to see your brand new containment cell." At last the entity spoke. Research. Its voice resembled a distorted version of Oz's. Research? What kind of... Oz wasn't able to finish his question. July 7th, 1947, the creature said before ramming into the one-way glass and cracking it. As Oz stumbled backwards from the force, the creature collapsed on the ground, seizing and screaming as its abdomen. Get the stags in here now! Oz cried out, but it was too late. A black mass of something shiny and tendrilled leaped out of the not deer, scuttling around the cell before shattering the window and leaving the empty shell of a deer behind. The Site-44 breach system activated and attempted to initiate emergency containment protocols, but the mysterious black mass escaped its sector, made its way toward the main exit, broke through the glass of the front exit door, and vanished into the shrubbery outside. The escaped anomaly could not be found and recontained. Ever since this incident, there have been a record-breaking number of chronic wasting disease cases identified in deer in the surrounding area, as well as an unprecedented increase in UFO reports. Further research is currently ongoing, but it is unknown whether we will ever truly know what these creatures are. Only one thing is for certain: they are definitely not deer. Warning: this site is for SCP personnel with O5 approval. Access beyond this point for those with standard level 4 security is prohibited and may result in termination of Foundation employment. Unauthorized visitors who survive the memetic kill agent are detained and interrogated under truth-exacting memetic agents. Dr. Herman Wright was used to high security protocols. He had been working with the SCP Foundation for several years and had dealt with specimens both terrifying and valuable. But something about this site was different. The security was tighter than he'd ever seen. And it all seemed a bit too much for what looked like a run-of-the-mill warehouse in Alexandria, Egypt. The street seemed normal. It was surrounded by businesses selling food and clothes, and none of the locals seemed to give a second glance. But as soon as he was approved for access and entered the warehouse, it was a very different story. He looked into the cognitohazard testing screen, designed to cause psychic damage to anyone who hadn't been inoculated by the Foundation, and entered the large bunker. Automated guns lined the walls. He could see the outlines of trapdoors below him, and he was pretty sure the whole place was rigged to blow if a large-scale assault hit. The Foundation was taking no chance with whatever they had found in Egypt. What could they be keeping locked up below? As Dr. Wright walked through the long tunnel leading to the staircase, he could see a series of rules marked on the wall. No open flames allowed within SCP-4001. No firearms or bladed weapons allowed within SCP-4001. All writing utensils brought into SCP-4001 must be approved by a majority of the O5 Council. Violating these conditions could cause a CK-class restructuring scenario, or an XK-class end-of-the-world scenario. Dr. Wright's mind raced as he entered the massive antechamber and descended the staircase, but he wasn't prepared for what he saw. It was a library. The biggest library he had ever seen, with bookcases stretched as far as the eye could see. The library was far bigger than the warehouse looked from the outside, and Dr. Wright assumed it must be a disguise built on top of the much bigger, older facility that had been discovered by the Foundation. It wouldn't be the first time the Foundation found something that didn't conform to the laws of Euclidean geometry. SCP locations often played by their own rules. As Dr. Wright exited the staircase and walked up to the first bookcase, he could swear he heard rustling sounds among the shelves. Was something moving? He hadn't seen anyone walking the aisles when he descended the staircase, and he was pretty sure he was alone here, wasn't he? Making things stranger, a quick look at the bookcase didn't show any books he was familiar with. None had standard titles. In fact, they all seemed to follow a simple format. Each title a different individual person. All books looked the exact same. Same binding, same thickness, same number of pages. Was this some sort of SCP reference library? Suddenly, a hand slapped down on Dr. Wright's shoulder and his heart nearly jumped out of his chest. He turned to see a gray-haired man in an SCP lab coat extending a hand to him. Dr. Waylon Henricks, Chief Scientist in charge of testing at SCP-4001. You must be Dr. Wright. He didn't give Dr. Wright a chance to respond. Dr. Henricks didn't seem like the kind of man to be very interested in what others had to say. Yes. About time the Foundation sent me a new research assistant. I suppose you have a lot of questions? Dr. Wright was supposed to be a researcher, not an assistant. He didn't suppose it would do any good to point that out. When Dr. Wright tried to question what it was that he'd be researching, Dr. Henricks told him that it would be easier to show than explain. With that, he motioned Dr. Wright to a nearby table, where one of the countless identical books on the shelves was waiting. He nodded at the book, prompting the younger doctor to turn it over and read the title. He couldn't believe what he saw. There on the front of the book was his name, Herman Wright. Dr. Wright looked at his colleague in confusion, and Dr. Henricks motioned for him to take a look. It was written in a language that he had never seen before, but was somehow instantly recognizable and understandable. And the book really was about him. Every detail of his life had been written down in this volume, starting with his birth, containing details that no one but he knew. His whole life story was here. From his childhood to his education to his eventual recruitment by the SCP Foundation. But the book wasn't completed. The last line that had been written described his entry into the secured confines of SCP-4001 that very day. Dr. Henricks had a mad glint in his eye.
Are you starting to understand? One for each of us. Every person who has ever lived, roughly 120 billion people since the dawn of man. Their lives all written down in these books. Every time someone is born, their book appears in this library, and their story gets written as it happens. The Foundation has been monitoring this site since the 1800s, but it's been operating much longer than that, since the dawn of recorded history.
Dr. Henricks passed Dr. Wright another book. It was simply titled The Hunter, and it chronicled the life of a prehistoric man who spent his days searching for wild game. He lived 23 violent, monotonous years before his story ended abruptly when a saber-toothed tiger decided it was interested in the same mammoth he was hunting. This must have been one of the oldest books in the library. A book for every person on Earth. Dr. Wright could only imagine what the scale of this massive library must be. Dr. Henricks explained that mapping the library was a huge challenge, before producing a map from his pocket and laying it out on the desk.
You're at base camp. This is where new births generate on the shelves along with books pertaining to the first humans. If you want to track down specific books, you'll need to know where you're going. We've established base camps around the library to mark significant eras in human history with notable books. At each camp, you'll find generators, supplies, and beacons to light your way. If you're going back far enough, you could be traveling for days or even weeks.
Dr. Wright was fascinated by this bizarre location, containing the sum total of human experience within its massively expanding walls. But there was one thing he couldn't figure out. Just why was this seemingly harmless location featuring constantly changing books the most securely guarded SCP he had ever encountered? Dr. Henricks knew he was referring to the extensive rules he must have seen as he entered. The other doctor reached into his pocket and said,
"Let's just say that around here, the pen is mightier than the sword."
He pressed the pen into Dr. Wright's hand and flipped open the back page of his book. It was blank, the rest of his story waiting to be written.
What's something you've always wanted in your life, Dr. Wright? Think literally. Why not put it in your book or remove something you've always wanted gone?
Slowly, Dr. Wright thought back to his teenage years and recalled an injury that he suffered in a mugging that damaged his leg and left him with a limp. He nervously used the pen to scribble out the words and sentences describing the event. After a few seconds, he felt a headache and suffered from a slight nosebleed. After that, the limp and pain from the injury was gone, and he could no longer recall the event.
You see, Dr. Wright, that's the secret of SCP-4001,
Dr. Henricks said with a mad gleam in his eye.
This library doesn't just let us read the history of humanity. It lets us write it. That's why you're here, to test the limit of this power and see what this library can do for the Foundation.
Dr. Henricks soon provided Dr. Wright with footage of some of the many tests conducted in the library, and what Dr. Wright saw amazed him. The books could rewrite the laws of nature with alarming speed, as some unfortunate D-Class personnel found out. D-0546 was brought into a room with a full head of hair. The D-Class personnel was instructed to scribble "lost all hair" into his book, and he soon started scratching his head as he rapidly started shedding hair. After less than 2 minutes, the man was completely bald. D-0567, a young woman who had been brutally injured when attacked by an escaping SCP, was bedridden and would never walk again, according to all the Foundation doctors. As the D-Class personnel used a pen to scribble over the line in her book describing her injury, Dr. Wright watched as she suffered a minor nosebleed and then sat up, getting out of bed as if she had never been injured and no longer remembered being attacked. Dr. Claire Williams, a Foundation researcher sick with cancer, wrote into the book about curing her symptoms, and then addressed the camera explaining that this was her third time altering her own book. Her lymphoma symptoms had returned after several months and 2 years, respectively, but it seemed that as long as she continued to make changes to her book, then she could keep the cancer at bay indefinitely. But not all the tests ended with positive results, as Dr. Wright moved on to another selection of tapes labeled mortality tests. A D-Class personnel who was given a fatal dose of drugs and then had their death erased from their book 45 minutes later miraculously returned to life, but showed significant cognitive deficits after. Another D-Class, an older woman killed in a containment breach, had her death erased from the book, but came back deeply disturbed. She survived 15 days in containment, repeating, "Send me back, let me go," over and over again before committing suicide. A D-Class personnel killed 28 days prior was brought back by writing "returned back to life" in their book, but died again just 13 minutes later from a cerebral hemorrhage. But it was the next tape that was the most disturbing. It documented a new book that was written by the Foundation, depicting the life of a fictional man down to the slightest detail. It was carefully placed in the correct position in the archives, resembling all the other books. And Dr. Wright watched the tape in amazement as the man resembling the fictional character created for the book spontaneously generated an SCP-4001. Almost immediately, the man started vomiting blood and died less than 2 minutes later. The book carefully described all the things he died from and stated that this was exactly as it was supposed to be. The fake book then disappeared into the archives, never to be seen again. The archive knew when it was being used to play with life and death, and it didn't want any part of it. The next tape wasn't a test at all. It was a video interview showing a Greek-speaking scientist speaking with an ancient-looking old man, found living in the archives slowly after its discovery by the Foundation. The man, who described himself as the Watcher of Alexandria Eternal, believed he was keeping the archives safe from the Roman Empire and the other invaders. He was unaware that thousands of years had passed since his watch began. He had been using the books to write himself another day of life, and to cure his ills ever since he began guarding the library. At the conclusion of the interview, he asked to leave, and this request was granted by the Foundation. The ancient man died of old age shortly after setting foot out of the library. While the library can't technically cure death, it does seem to have nearly limitless ability to prolong life, as long as someone is willing to stay close by and never forgets to write themselves another day. Where did this incredible power come from? An 2005 authorized investigation into the origins of SCP-4001 revealed that under the archive's carpet is a concrete floor covered by a layer of ash. The ash was carbon dated to between 70 and 80,000 years old. And further analysis revealed the ash is likely to be the remains of burnt wood and paper, despite there being no known records within the archive itself about a major fire having occurred there. Dr. Wright didn't have much time to dwell on the library's great power of life, because he was suddenly shaken from his thoughts by the sound of alarms. Was the library being breached? No, it was Foundation officials, led by a man recognized as Dr. Lincoln Abrams, the very man who assigned him to this project, and he did not look happy. He explained that he knew what Dr. Waylon Henricks had been up to, writing in books, changing the lives of subordinates in an attempt to play God. He knew about everything, of course, because he had read Dr. Henricks' own book. He knew all of the doctor's secrets. He knew everything.
No! I'm so close, Dr. Abrams! I know I can crack the archive's rules! There's a way to conquer death here, I can feel it!
Dr. Abrams was done listening, and with a wave of his hand, Foundation security took Dr. Henricks into custody for a debriefing and likely demotion. Dr. Abrams then turned his attention to the new young researcher. Dr. Wright, eventful first day, I gather. I'll appoint a new lead scientist shortly, but until then, don't disrupt anything. Remember, the archive is writing our stories as we speak. It's not very happy with Dr. Henricks. Make sure your story turns out better. And with that, Dr. Abrams and his security team departed, leaving Dr. Herman Wright alone with the endless archives of Alexandria Eternal. wondering what would be written in his own tome, as the sound of new books popping into existence filled the air with ominous rustling.
There is something inherently unnerving about the sight of someone wearing a gas mask. Maybe it's the wide, soulless portholes where a person's eyes should be, or the huge round filter extruding from their face that makes them look like something inhuman. It could also be the fact that if ever you see someone wearing a gas mask, you may be surrounded by poisonous gas, and if you're not wearing one yourself, someone else's gas mask may be the last thing you ever see. Whatever the reason, you might be wondering why we're talking so much about gas masks. Well, that's because you're about to meet SCP-1499, which is, as you might have already guessed, an anomalous gas mask. For all you military history buffs out there, SCP-1499 is specifically a Soviet GP-5 gas mask. These were produced between 1962 and 1990 as a way to protect the wearer from the fallout of a nuclear blast. Back then, during the Cold War, an atomic conflict between the United States and the USSR, that's Russia, was a constant threat. And so these masks were sent to most of the fallout shelters in the Soviet Union. While the GP-5 masks could survive in all weather and protect against radioactive substances for a time, some of their filters contained a number of harmful chemicals like lead and asbestos. The fact that these gas masks were airtight would mean that somebody could end up inhaling these toxic chemicals while trying to protect themselves from nuclear fallout. If you look up the definition of irony in the dictionary, you may see a picture of one of these gas masks sitting right next to it. And if you think that sounds bad, just wait until you hear what sets SCP-1499 apart from the rest. Upon first inspection, the mask still seems to perform its original function. The filter works properly, and the airtight seal is still formed when placed upon somebody's head. However, when worn by someone, the anomalous effects of SCP-1499 will also activate. While it doesn't fuse to the wearer's face and turns them into a hysterical zombie chillingly asking for their mommy, the gas mask does cause anyone who puts it on to completely disappear from view. Now, it's worth noting that this isn't a gas mask that grants its user the power of invisibility. If that was the case, this anomalous item may actually be desirable. SCP-1499 instead causes a person to physically vanish, as in they are no longer detectable at all. Subjects that have worn SCP-1499 report that they don't feel any sensation of moving. They simply put the mask on and end up, well, we'll get to where it is they go. You see, through testing, the SCP Foundation's researchers were able to determine that giving someone a two-way radio before they put SCP-1499 on means that they can still be contacted after they vanish. And it's through these radios that the Foundation discovered where the mask wearers go. During testing, subjects have reportedly found themselves in a strange alternate dimension after putting on SCP-1499. It has been described as a dark environment, inhospitable, barren, and filled with tall, black tower-like structures. You would think being unceremoniously transported to another dimension by a gas mask would be bad enough. Just wait until you meet the locals. According to a number of test subjects, a group of humanoid entities inhabit this dimension, designated as SCP-1499-1. These creatures are taller than the average person, completely nude and covered from head to toe in a coat of a dark, viscous substance unlike anything found in our dimension. These SCP-1499-1 entities also have been described as having too many mouths and a large number of eyes covering their bodies. From the sound of it, the whole place makes the Upside Down from Stranger Things sound like a pleasant destination for a family vacation. For the record, the reason we say according to a number of test subjects is that there has never been any photographic or video evidence of this place and the creatures that inhabit it. All that we have gathered to date has come strictly from first-hand descriptions of those experiencing the anomalous effects of SCP-1499. Luckily, anyone that puts on SCP-1499 and finds themselves in this place has a very quick and easy escape route. Should a subject encounter any danger in this dark, inhospitable dimension, then taking the gas mask off will drop them right back into our own plane of existence. Upon arriving back, they will not have moved from the spot they were standing in when they first disappeared,
but it is unknown exactly how the gas mask is able to return them, or indeed how it can send someone to an entirely different dimension at all. So, a gateway to another dimension. That's what the mask is. The Foundation has been running tests on SCP-1499 since they first acquired it, at first using D-Class personnel. The first test involving SCP-1499 saw a D-Class, D-67393, told to put on the mask. When she did, she found herself transported inside a building that was constructed from an unknown black substance. D-67393 surveyed the room she was in for a few seconds, only to hear something moving close by. The sound caused her to panic, and she wrenched the gas mask off her face, returning to the test chamber. Given that there was now a risk of losing SCP-1499, the Foundation moved forward with tests involving trained agents instead of D-Class personnel. Following this, the next test involved an Agent C putting on the mask, and like the D-Class before him, he found himself in the same dark room. But instead of taking off SCP-1499 at the first sign of trouble, this agent explored his surroundings. Agent C was able to descend the building to a reasonable degree until he heard sounds coming from the floor below. After hiding himself, Agent C witnessed the very first sighting of the SCP-1499-1 creatures, remaining undetected and then safely removing the mask when the creatures had passed. Another agent, known as Agent U, was selected for an SCP-1499 test, chosen especially for her extensive training in stealth. Like those before her, she put on the gas mask. Instantly, she found herself in the place where her predecessor had left off, and continued the exploration of the building. Detecting movement from the floors above, Agent U exited the building and spotted a number of SCP-1499-1 instances. The creatures were mulling aimlessly around, each sporting their own unique mutations, occasionally uttering low, grating noises. By now, if they were still using D-classes, they probably would have lost the mask and the people wearing it 100 times over. Never get a D-class to do a field agent's job. Making her way past more of the tall, dark structures, the agent followed and observed a group of 4 creatures. A fifth approached them, prompting one from the group to step forward. As Agent U watched, these SCP-1499-1 creatures began violently assaulting each other, until she too pulled the gas mask off and returned to the Foundation. Shortly afterward, one final agent, Agent K, was sent into this alternate dimension. This was less of a test, more a mission with the purposes of reconnaissance, to give the Foundation a better, clearer idea of what the environment was like, and to possibly even make contact with the SCP-1499-1s and understand them better. However, the outcome that followed could not have been worse. Agent K appeared in the other dimension between 2 of the black structures. The lighting made it difficult to see much of the environment around him, but he remarked that the buildings resembled tall spires constructed out of hard rock, as was the ground beneath him. After a few short minutes, he soon spotted a group of SCP-1499-1s entering a larger structure, an elaborate building with a number of towers and spikes on it, as well as what appeared to be blood. Approaching the building with caution, Agent K located a small, secluded side entrance, away from the larger front door. As quietly as he could, he made his way inside. The sounds of grinding filled the air from all around him, as Agent K saw a huge group of the mutated humanoid creatures. Each one had their mouth wide open, all of their mouths wide open, making a chorus of grating sounds. The entities were, according to K's description, all facing towards one of the SCP-1499-1s that was standing on a platform in front of them, with a number of bodies around it. This creature seemed to be leading an odd ritual and began to cut open its own torso. Worm-like creatures spilled out of the open womb and a beam of light followed, projecting out of the entity's chest. Agent K realized that this light was some form of portal. Another worm, like the kind that had come out of the ritual leader's chest, began to appear in the portal. Deciding to act, Agent K dashed out from his hiding place, opening fire at the creatures all around him. He reached for something glowing in the lead entity's chest, which he thought was bringing the worm creature through the portal. Grabbing it, Agent K pulled off the gas mask and found himself back at the Foundation, holding a human heart. But it doesn't end there. At the exact same time, on the exact same date, A man attacked the Cathedral of Christ the Savior in Moscow, Russia. During the church's morning services, the gunman entered dressed in a suit with a gas mask over his face and proceeded to shoot 10 civilians. 6 were killed, 3 left in critical condition, including the church's chanter. However, the worst occurred to the priest performing the service. The attacker ran to the front of the cathedral, producing a knife which he used to cut open the priest's chest and remove his heart. Then, just as quickly as he had appeared, the assailant vanished before the eyes of multiple witnesses, and Moscow police were unable to find any trace of the man. Officially, the cathedral was attacked by Nikolai Orlov. Undercover Foundation operatives inside Russia's media and military have spread this cover story of a violent man who acted alone in his attack on the church. Meanwhile, the SCP Foundation is keeping Agent K detained, questioning him about his involvement in the incident. According to him, everything happened exactly as he described it. No church, no priest, just him wearing SCP-1499 and surrounded by the creatures. The audio recordings taken from his exploration mission also seem to align with this story, but that still doesn't explain how another figure in a gas mask appeared in Moscow and claimed the lives of multiple churchgoers. Not only that, but dispatching them in the exact same way Agent K dealt with the SCP-1499-1 creatures. The only possible explanation was that Agent K was the perpetrator, even if, in his mind, he was still telling the truth. Hoping to avoid another incident, the O5 Council has suspended all further testing with SCP-1499. Agent K has been scheduled to undergo a psychological evaluation, believing the creature he saw being summoned had to be stopped at all costs. The other agents and the D-Class involved in earlier testing are all being brought in for questioning as well. It is still unknown what the anomalous effect of SCP-1499 truly is. Is it actually capable of transporting someone to another dimension? Or does it give a person hallucinations that make them think they're gallivanting off in Dimension X, while they're actually walking up to a church about to do something unthinkable? With testing suspended, we may never know, but it leaves us with an important message. Think carefully about everything you do, because what you think you can see doesn't always reflect what's really there. Why do so many of the indigenous cultures of the colder regions of North America seem to share the same legend? A legend that tells of a monster that lurks in the forests, bringing cold and death to any that meet it. This creature is an omen of famine, a territorial beast that preys on human beings. Some cultures describe it as an unholy abomination, a spirit of winter and a warning against the dangers of selfishness, one that is created whenever a person resorts to cannibalism in order to survive. It will gladly devour any man, woman, or child that wanders into its territory, holding a horrifying and insatiable hunger for human flesh. So how did so many cultures end up with the same story? Could it be because it's real? Depictions of the beast vary, but it is most commonly recognized by its tall skeletal form, like a body exhumed from the grave, even carrying the stench of death and decay with it. Anyone who encounters one risks being eaten or transformed into a creature just like it. The monster's name means an evil spirit that devours mankind, though to even say the name is taboo, as it's believed to give power to the beast. Of course, these are all just legends, right? Stories to warn against the dangers of greed and selfishness, but otherwise nothing to fear. There's no proof that such a beast could actually be roaming the frozen wastes. Many at the SCP Foundation felt the same way, until they heard about SCP-323, the Wendigo's skull. Kept under lock and key by the Foundation with around-the-clock surveillance, SCP-323 is an anomalous object with ties to the various Wendigo legends. As the object's moniker suggests, SCP-323 is a skull, not a human skull, mind you. It more closely resembles a cervid skull. Cervids are a family of mammals that include most varieties of deer, elk, and other similar animals, and this particular cervid skull sports a tall pair of antlers. SCP-323 is definitely not a fresh skull either. It shows signs of weathering and a few scars across the surface, looking as if the bone has been bleached and eroded through exposure to the elements. The skull is also missing its lower jaw, and has a sizable hole on the rear underside that may have been carved using stone tools. SCP-323 is kept restrained inside an armored container within a concrete containment cell, and personnel are only ever allowed near it to check the restraints for signs of damage. Additionally, any Foundation staff that enter SCP-323's cell must be accompanied by an armed security officer, and in the event of a containment breach, the entire site is to be evacuated. Seems like a lot of precautions and safety measures for an old piece of bone. Surely a harmless deer skull could never be that dangerous, right? Wrong. You might be forgiven for thinking that a skull can't possibly cause harm. After all, SCP-323 is just a skull, then whatever animal it belonged to is dead. But this skull is far more than it appears to be. Through extensive testing, the SCP Foundation's researchers have learned that the skull isn't dead. No, this skull is awake and aware. It can see, hear, and has a sense of touch, and it can and will react to various stimuli. However, this does not necessarily mean that SCP-323 is alive or even sentient, but it definitely appears to have some level of sapience. It will target certain members of personnel that get too close, and has attempted multiple times to breach containment. It also reacts violently to anyone speaking English or French near it, the only two languages prohibited inside SCP-323's cell. So while the skull is not technically alive, it is definitely aware. Still, why the need for so many protocols to keep it contained? It's not as if a skull can just walk off on its own. Of course not. But SCP-323 can move, at least to a certain degree, often in a reactionary manner. SCP-323 will vibrate or move on its own, for example, turning to watch as personnel enter its containment cell. In most cases, these movements are tiny and insignificant, but other times the skull lunges, launching itself at Foundation personnel as it desperately tries to get free. Now you know why it's kept restrained. So, we have an antlered cervid skull that can move and has a low level of awareness. On their own, these would be more than enough to warrant the Foundation's interest, but the anomalous properties of SCP-323 don't stop there. The skull has an inherent ability to influence the minds of those around it. Anyone spending an hour within a 15-meter radius of SCP-323 is likely to experience the effects of this influential power. This will often result in them exhibiting uncharacteristic behaviors, thoughts, and urges, including cannibalistic tendencies and outbursts of random violence. Almost 3/4 of people that suffer the influence of SCP-323 will feel an overwhelming compulsion to take the Wendigo skull and fit their heads into the chiseled hole on the rear underside. If someone attempting this finds that their head is too big to fit inside the hollow skull, there have been cases of individuals trying to bludgeon their heads on any hard surface they can find nearby in an attempt to get their head down to a more manageable size. This will continue until one of 3 outcomes occurs. 1. The person manages to fit their head into the skull. 2. They cause themselves so much cranial damage that they are rendered unconscious. Or 3. They end up killing themselves through repeated violent head trauma. Of course, if a person actually manages to fit their head inside SCP-323, then that is a different story entirely. In these instances, the individual becomes classified as an instance of SCP-323-1. Within 10 minutes of wearing the skull, this person will suffer dramatic changes to their body. Any and all body fat will be rapidly shed as their hair also begins to fall out, leaving them looking starved and almost skeletal in appearance. Their distal phalanges, those are the bones at the tip of the fingers, will elongate and rupture the skin as they become bony, claw-like appendages. The subject will also find that their teeth have grown abnormally long and sharp, while their limbs will blacken as if they were suffering frostbite symptoms. Along with their external transformations, SCP-323-1 will also get increased strength and heightened resistance to pain. They aren't invulnerable though, and can still sustain damage and injuries. SCP-323 will also have a dramatic change happen to their metabolism. which will occur a few minutes into the physical transformation. The subject will now need an almost constant intake of calories, which, if they don't receive, will cause them to starve almost instantly. With the transformation process complete, the new instance of SCP-323-1 has finally become the Wendigo, a terrifying monster with one goal: to feed. The SCP-323 instance will seek out any human beings it can find so that it can feed upon their flesh. Those who have witnessed the 323 instance in the midst of a feeding frenzy have described the way it violently slaughtered any person it could find, leaving only a mess of blood as it devoured them, their screams mixed in with the sounds of bones crunching. In the times that the creature cannot find a human to nourish its monstrous appetite, it will try to keep itself alive any way it can. Sometimes it will slow down its movement to try and conserve energy. Other times it will ration whatever food is available to it, saving some of its last meal for a leftover snack. And on occasion, the monster will engage in auto-cannibalism, a form of cannibalism that involves eating parts of itself. Humans certainly seem to be its preferred food source though. Even when other sources of meat would be easier to acquire, SCP-323-1 will zero in on human beings and will do anything it can to make a person its next meal. When chasing down its prey, human or otherwise, SCP-323-1 has been observed uttering phrases either spoken in the primary language of whoever was transformed by the skull, or in the Severn Ojibwe, Potawatomi, and Cree languages. These are all native languages of the numerous indigenous creatures that shared legends of the Wendigo. Where do the phrases come from, though? Are they another side effect of SCP-323's influence? Or do they originate from the skull itself? The Foundation's researchers are still trying to figure that out, and at the moment, they have no clues as to where they come from. In one containment breach in 2006, during which an instance of SCP-323-1 was able to kill and devour 12 members of Foundation personnel, on-site surveillance recorded audio of the creature speaking. It rasped, while dragging a body behind it. After this, the sound of a wet cracking noise was recorded, possibly one of the victim's bones being broken by SCP-323-1 so it could get to the marrow inside. The 323-1 instance does at times seem to try and resist the influence of the Wendigo skull. Additional recordings capture the creature saying, the creature then said, followed by noises of it eating the body. It seems that even the Wendigo has its own internal struggles, perhaps showing that there is still something left of the human who put on the skull, and that deep down they are fighting against their cannibalistic impulses. But where exactly did the Foundation find SCP-323? And is it really the skull of an actual Wendigo, the famous creature from North American legend? In 1997, the SCP Foundation sent a detachment to Bitterron Lake in Saskatchewan, Canada. There had been reports of a local community murdering individuals and leaving their bodies in the forest to appease a dangerous creature residing nearby. This creature, as it was later discovered, was an instance of SCP-323-1. Someone had found the skull and succumbed to its influence, placing it on their head and turning into a monster. Ever since, the locals had been killing people and offering up their dead bodies as sustenance, fearful of what would happen if they didn't, after being brought up with legends of the Wendigo. SCP Foundation agents were able to capture the beast, however it died of starvation while being transported back to containment. They also covered up the recent deaths in the area by giving the local residents amnestics, and creating a cover story about an unidentified serial killer. Prior to this, James Namagoose, a local man who was involved in the murders, was brought in for questioning. He remained oddly calm when interviewed, but admitted he had helped move the bodies that were being offered up as food for SCP-323-1, or as he called it, the Wendigo. According to James, a local story among the Cree people told of men who had once tried to control a Wendigo, and perhaps even tame it through offerings of food. Whether or not James and his fellow locals had the same intention, their primary concern was keeping themselves safe. He described first encountering the creature, a warped man walking out of the woods, killed our friends right in front of us. Sometimes it would stare more than it would make to kill, try to talk to you. It whispered at me, "Permiso, come and eat." It made me cold in my bones. As the interview continued, James claimed that he felt like he understood this warped man. He described feeling like the Wendigo was encouraging him to kill, that the creature would help him pass when his own time came. James told the Foundation doctor questioning him that he had heard the creature in his mind, and he felt it watching him almost constantly. Mr. Namagu stated that he hoped in killing people as offerings to the Wendigo, that his own family would be spared. Like the other locals, James Namagus was given amnestics to forget all about the creature and the murders he'd played a part in committing. So far, none of the Foundation's staff have experienced any similar behavioral effects to those James described. Those who work closely with SCP-323 or have witnessed an instance of SCP-323-1 have felt the creature communicating with them, or urging them to kill on its behalf. Ultimately, who is to say if SCP-323 is the skull of a Wendigo like those from legends? It certainly seems like it is, but with no way to tell exactly how old the skull is. Perhaps it's actually the reverse, and it was the Wendigo legend that spawned from instances of SCP-323-1 that were first encountered by indigenous North American cultures hundreds of years ago. One thing is for certain: if you ever come across a skull with tall antlers, you should try to resist putting it on. Otherwise, you might not be feeling like yourself for much longer.
It's a perfect day for a wedding. On a warm spring afternoon, a bride and a handsome groom are exchanging the special rings they had custom designed and made for each other. As they take turns placing the rings on each other's fingers, a man standing at the end of the wedding party steps out of position. He approaches the groomsman next to him and reaches into his jacket, taking out a pair of pliers that he hands to the groomsman. The groomsman happily takes the tool and then, without any hesitation, shoves the pliers into his mouth and begins removing his teeth one by one. When he is finished, he hands the bloody teeth to the man along with the pliers. The man then goes to the next groomsman, who repeats the same process. He continues going down the line until all of the groomsmen and bridesmaids have removed their teeth, seemingly without pain or resistance. The man then approaches the bride and groom. He hands each of them half of the pile of teeth, which they gladly accept. They then begin to eat the teeth without delay, seemingly not bothered by the intense damage they're causing to their own teeth and jaws by doing so. The man watches as the groom moves the priest who is officiating the wedding aside. As the entire church looks on in joy, the groom opens his mouth, and the deafening sound of cicadas are heard. This is only the beginning of what the SCP Foundation has labeled an SCP-2852 event, a terrifying and little understood phenomenon that is better known by the nickname of the anomalous creature responsible for them, Cousin Johnny. The Foundation had been trying to contain Cousin Johnny for decades, not that it ever done them any good. Johnny is a Keter class anomaly that's thus far proven impossible to contain. This is an entity so dangerous and volatile that 3 different mobile task forces are devoted to detecting and disrupting its activities. MTF Upsilon 36, aka the Party Crashers, MTF Upsilon 52, aka Cater Duty, and MTF Upsilon 99, aka the Altar Boys. But so far, all the Foundation has been able to really do is swoop in afterwards and do their best to pick up the pieces of people's shattered lives. Cousin Johnny has so far been observed to only operate in the North American subcontinent, and only seems to appear at Anglican or Catholic baptisms, weddings, and funerals. However, Foundation operatives charged with keeping a lid on Cousin Johnny harbor the hidden fear that he may one day expand his hunting grounds and wreak terror worldwide. If Johnny became multinational or multi-denominational, his violence, insanity, and pure evil may truly become impossible to minimize.
so compatible communities are constantly monitored for increased levels of juvenile delinquency, sterility, domestic violence, and divorce. After all this, you're probably wondering, who or what actually is Cousin Johnny, and how does he cause so much horrific tragedy? At face value, nothing about the appearance of Cousin Johnny would suggest an anomalous nature, or even any sort of danger. He appears to be a middle-aged white male, often with scruffy hair and a beard. On a cellular level too, Cousin Johnny appears all too human, but when you look at his physiology, it's a whole different story. Cousin Johnny has no identifiable organs whatsoever. His body is made out of a fibrous muscular tissue. The only exceptions are his teeth and hair, which are made out of a kind of chitin, a key component of insect exoskeletons, such as those possessed by cicadas. Johnny's eyes are the first clue that something is off about him. From a distance, they appear perfectly normal, but up close, they're glassy and dead. This is because his eyes aren't actually attached to any nerves inside his head. With no nervous system or vocal cords, Johnny's ability to see, move, and talk defy any kind of logical explanation. His speech will seem completely normal to the people under his spell, but to anyone else, it comes out as complete nonsense, often described as word salad. If people in attendance are briefed in advance about this phenomenon, whatever hypnotic ability causes them to hear his sounds as intelligible words won't work, and they'll be aware of how nonsensical it all sounds. But of course, that doesn't mean they're safe. Cousin Johnny appears at family gatherings and religious rituals, and immediately he'll be treated as though he's always been there. You know your Cousin Johnny, right? You go way back. Or at least you're pretty sure you do. Nothing will appear unnatural about his sudden presence. In fact, if you're one of the victims of one of his incidents, chances are you'll actually find yourself taking a shine to Cousin Johnny. Sure, his sense of humor is a little crude and raunchy, but you can't help but enjoy his company. He's a fun guy to be around, and after all, he's family.
As previously mentioned, he'll only appear at 3 different kinds of events: baptisms, weddings, and funerals, and only those that are affiliated with either the Catholic or Anglican religions. The SCP Foundation has classified baptisms that Cousin Johnny attends as blue-level events, weddings are known as white-level events, and funerals are black-level events, with each one escalating in severity, violence, and horror.
First, baptisms, the blue-level events. In these events, Cousin Johnny will appear and begin to act as a third godparent, despite there traditionally only being 2. As the infant is lowered into the holy water, the entirety of their top layer of skin will come off like a molting snake. Despite looking horrific, this apparently causes no harm to the child. The godparents will then eat this discarded skin as though it's the most normal thing in the world. After this, the family will leave the church together, and Cousin Johnny will leave with them. He won't appear at any subsequent celebrations of the child's baptism. Of course, this is just the beginning of the terror. Following Cousin Johnny's appearance at the baptism, the child's risk of dying in the next 6 months skyrockets, and if they survive, they're at an increased risk of becoming unstable and violent later on in life. Their parents and godparents will both become unable to conceive any further children, and are likely to be found dead from drowning within 5 years of the event. Those who are only tangentially involved in the baptism ritual have a massively increased chance of failed pregnancies, or if they do conceive, they may become a danger to their offspring. Children who live through blue-level events and survive past adolescence will experience adverse side effects when encountering the songs of cicadas well into adulthood, from experiencing physical sickness to going through dangerous psychotic episodes. Weddings or white-level events are more complex and severe. In this case, Cousin Johnny will insert himself into the wedding as a groomsman, and the most horrifying events will begin to take place after the vows have been exchanged. Johnny will provide various implements that allow the bridesmaids and groomsmen to remove their teeth, which are then given to the bride and groom to eat, which they do, causing severe damage to their own teeth in the process. The groom will then vocalize an unknown cicada call at an incredible volume, as loud as 140 decibels in some instances, rendering the bride and everyone else near the altar completely deaf. At the wedding reception, where everyone is continuing to behave as if nothing out of the ordinary is happening, Cousin Johnny will ruin things farther by giving the best man's speech. The speech is more of his typical complete nonsense, though if you're there you'll never realize this, and think that this is the best speech you've ever heard. with some in the audience laughing hysterically while others cry uncontrollably. Once his speech is done, he'll present a gift to the newly married couple: 3.5 kilograms of human hair in various colors, 13 deceased specimens of a certain cicada known as Linnaeus cicada, and 23 human teeth in a cardboard box. DNA tests on all the gifts have been inconclusive as to their origin. Much like many celebrity marriages, unions that occurred during white-level events never last, and all end up divorced within 2 years, often as a result of domestic violence, and any children born during their brief marriage will be violent and unstable. But it's not just the wedding party that gets to experience the fun of a visit from Cousin Johnny. All married individuals who attended the wedding will find that they are unable to conceive children, despite no biological indicators of infertility. Any children present at the white-level event will show no interest in romance throughout their life, and often die tragically before reaching the age of 18. Finally, and most horrifying of all, are funerals, or black-level events. While blue and white-level events can potentially be disrupted before they are completed, lessening or preventing the horrific results, there is as yet no way to stop or prevent a black-level event at any stage. Any attempts to prevent Cousin Johnny from entering the church or funeral home will lead him to simply manifesting inside. Once in the room where the funeral is taking place, Cousin Johnny will first take up the role of eulogizer and begin speaking his standard nonsense to the attendants. The person who was emotionally closest to the departed will then open the casket, if this was not already an open casket funeral, and will then produce a large knife. It's unknown where the knives come from, as they're not present before the event and they disappear after. The funeral attendees will then use the knife on their wrists and sometimes throats, draining their blood into the coffin. Many lose more than enough blood to result in death, but none ever die from this, nor do they seem to feel any pain from their wounds. As the attendees take turns bleeding into the coffin, Cousin Johnny continues his eulogy, which eventually evolves into a cicada song, the kind sung by Linnaeus cicada males. The attendants sing the same song back to him in a kind of call and response. Cousin Johnny will then approach the coffin and vomit in a mixture of blood, wood pulp, and dead cicadas. The funeral will then proceed as normal, and the blood, vomit, and cicada-filled casket is then taken to the cemetery and buried. Black-level events will usually end with the body being interred in the ground, but if there's a wake after the funeral, the horrors of the black-level event will continue. At the wake, Cousin Johnny will climb on top of a table, lie down, and encourage the other attendants to devour him, which they do. All the while he continues to talk his nonsense, until there is nothing left. Much like blue and white level events, being in attendance leads to horrific after effects. All participants who experience this event will separate from their family through either suicide, moving, or divorce. Every individual present at the event will also find that they are no longer able to produce offspring, and couples present may also fall victim to incidences of domestic violence, often involving cannibalism, that usually leave one or both participants dead, while 6 out of 10 children involved will attempt to murder one or both of their parents before they turn 18. These black-level events are so horrible for all involved that any members of the specialized Cousin Johnny mobile task forces that happen to witness such an event are treated with Class A amnestics before they are transferred to another task force or retire, to ensure that they don't have to live with the memories of what they saw. Prior to that, they are closely monitored for any strange or antisocial behavior to make sure they weren't affected by the event. And they aren't the only SCP Foundation staff at risk of having been impacted by Cousin Johnny. It is theorized that as many as a third of Catholic and Anglican D-Class personnel were involved in the Black Level event at some point, and were driven to madness and violence by their fateful brushes with the strange relative that no one knows. So next time you're at a baptism, or a wedding, or a funeral, stay vigilant. Keep an eye on the other guests, and always ask yourself, do you really have a Cousin Johnny? It was an old factory in the middle of nowhere, long abandoned, but still standing. In the past it had been filled with workers, but now nothing ran through it besides the occasional wildlife. One July night in 1949 though, 4 teenagers decided it would be a good place to explore. The entrance to the factory was a large, old-fashioned looking wooden door that was locked tightly shut. The teens looked around for another way in, but couldn't find one. What they did find, though, was an old iron lockbox. After some effort, they managed to get the box open and found a ring of 12 old rusted steel keys sitting inside. Would these old keys open the wooden door? Would they find something inside that would make their night of breaking and entering worth it? If only they knew that by unlocking the door, all they would find was true horror, because they had just found SCP-004, better known as the 12 Keys and the Door. Not long after, the local sheriff received a call from 3 of the panicked teens. They explained that while trying to get into the factory, one of their friends had gone missing. The local authorities were quickly deployed, taking the 3 teens into custody and beginning a full search of the factory grounds. The searching sheriff's department officers did eventually manage to find a clue as to what happened to the missing teen, but it wasn't a good sign. It was their severed hand, and even more disturbing is that it wasn't discovered outside the factory. No, it was found over 8 kilometers away. Soon other body parts were also found, some as far as 32 kilometers away. But how could the parts of the dead teenager's body have been scattered so quickly and so far from each other? When the surviving teens were interrogated, they all repeated the same wild story. The now dead teen had taken one of the keys out of the old box they had found and used it to unlock the strange old-fashioned wooden door that led into the factory. They opened the door and stepped inside, and the moment they did, they were immediately torn into pieces that suddenly vanished. These were no ordinary keys, and this was no ordinary door. It was clear this was a job for the SCP Foundation. An SCP agent was deployed to the site to begin investigating this anomaly. After getting the keys from local authorities, the agent brought in a group of 12 D-Class personnel to test them, one for each key. And it soon became clear that there was one effect that was common. 10 of the keys seemed to cause an effect that was completely unsurvivable. Upon trying the key in the door, the test subject was immediately torn apart just like the unfortunate teenager. While one key caused the body parts to be scattered in the immediate vicinity, all the others seemed to vanish into thin air. But it was the other 2 keys that proved to be of even greater interest to the Foundation. Unlike with all the other tests, the D-Class using the key designated SCP-004-7 was able to enter the door and return completely unharmed. But the D-Class using SCP-004-12 was a different story. Physically, he returned unharmed, but he seemed barely able to stagger out of the room. He collapsed and then began trying to claw his eyes out in panic and terror. He was quickly restrained and interrogated, but he wasn't coherent enough to give the Foundation any idea of what lurked behind the door. The first D-Class to enter using SCP-004-7, the one who returned intact and sane, only said that it was a massive room inside, far bigger than the building appeared from the outside. It was determined that the use of this key was safe enough for further testing. The door was open again using the same key, and the Foundation researchers propped it open so that an armed team could go inside and hopefully come out. A brief exploration of the massive room showed some clear anomalous properties. Not only was the room impossible to measure and possibly limitless in size, it also seemed impossible to shine any light in the room beyond the entry, and the people inside were the only objects that could be felt or illuminated. Whatever this room was, it was keeping its secrets. It was clear the site needed to be locked down. All the initial witnesses who knew too much were terminated. The Foundation was a little more trigger-happy with terminations in the 40s, and the site was quickly locked down under the auspices of being dangerous due to unexploded ordinances. Fences were placed around the site so that there would be no more teenage explorations. The records are spotty and incomplete, but whatever happened behind those doors during the initial testing between 1949 and 1950, the Foundation decided it had learned enough. The space-time anomalies at play inside of SCP-004 were deemed too dangerous to explore further, and the site was sealed off with all testing suspended. Whatever was lurking behind those doors, it would keep its secrets, and the site seemed easy to secure and contain. But this was far from the end of SCP-004. and 50 years later, it made its presence known again. It was another July night, many decades after the unfortunate teenager first opened the doors to SCP-004. Only a few pieces of their body had been found, but suddenly the rest of the corpse appeared exactly where they had last been seen, outside the old wooden door. Even odder was the fact that even though the subject had died many years ago, their body was still fresh, as if they had been killed that same day, and this wouldn't be the only sudden reappearance. 2 days later, a second body missing parts appeared in front of the door. This was quickly identified as one of the original 12 test subjects who opened the door. Foundation scientists were once again sent to the site to explore the space-time anomalies, and it was becoming clear that what went inside the door didn't stay there. It seemed like it went somewhere that didn't exist on this same plane as our reality. And if it could be understood, it could be used. On March 21st, 1999, the Foundation began establishing a site inside of SCP-004, but not for testing or research purposes. Nuclear weapons around the world were proliferating fast, and evidence was mounting that World War III could happen soon. The Foundation needed a site that could survive anything, and the mysterious room opened by the rusted keys seemed like it could be their salvation. Supplies would go in the room and would be preserved there indefinitely, safe from even nuclear annihilation. But getting the site set up would pose its own challenges. Now dubbed Site-62, the facility was soon expanded to house certain SCPs as well, in addition to a supercomputer to house all Foundation data. This would make it another invaluable backup in the event of an end-of-the-world event that necessitated a reboot. The site was completed over the next year, during which time they added high-tech containment units that could hold even the most dangerous SCP specimens. Entering and exiting the facility seemed to pose a risk to those working on it, though. Time no longer behaved like it should, even when using the one safe key. People would spend weeks in the site, then exit claiming they had only been there a few days. It was highly unpredictable, and the Foundation determined that it would be better to eliminate this X factor. All personnel working at Site-62 would now live on site permanently, with their families being told that they had died in an accident. It was August 18, 2003, when the United States and Canada were hit with a massive power outage, knocking out power to many of the Northeast's biggest population centers. While the SCP Foundation has backups on every site, multiple generators failed, and it was 53 minutes before power could be restored. During that time, those inside the mysterious room were plunged into total darkness, and it soon became clear they weren't alone. In the darkened room, the personnel reported feeling that they were surrounded by people that shouldn't be there, and creatures that shouldn't exist. While they couldn't see anything and nothing touched them, they were adamant that something was lurking in the room, and likely had been for a very long time. It seemed the limited source of light may be the only thing keeping these entities, whatever they are, at bay. When testing had resumed on SCP-004 after the bodies had reappeared outside the door, the Foundation decided to start exploring the effects of SCP-004-12 as well. What about this key caused such psychological horror that the subjects would try to tear out their own eyes? This key seemed to drive them insane, and of the 16 subjects, only 4 were still alive for any length of time after their return. Most remained in a catatonic state, but one was given extensive therapy and regained the ability to communicate, which allowed him to give the Foundation their best picture yet of what lurked inside the room. While the D-Class personnel was still severely affected by his time in the room and suffered near total amnesia, he did remember a few things. He remembered deep terror and memories being forced into his mind that made no sense, as if they were artificially implanted. And he remembered not being alone. He described a massive green being, large enough that he couldn't see where it began and where it ended. The Foundation didn't know what it was either, but what they did know for certain is that when 10 of these keys are used, the doors open to a dimension where the laws of physics are so different that it is completely unsurvivable. Studies are ongoing as to what makes this effect so fatal and if there is a way to survive it, but no answers have been found. And with only 3 bodies of victims recovered so far, there is little evidence. But one object found on site is of additional interest. Discovered roughly a year after the initial anomaly, in a manager's office on the factory grounds, SCP-004-14 seems to be a miniature version of the anomaly. It's a large box made out of wood, and it is the only other object opened by the one safe key, as well as 5 of the other keys that lead to death when used on the main door. And this box has unusual properties as well. It opens automatically, and much like SCP-004's room, it seems to be much larger on the inside than the outside. It is possible to come in and out safely, but once the box is locked again, it is a different story. Objects placed in the box don't seem to affect its weight, and when the box is closed and locked, they vanish completely. Unlike the main room, nothing that's gone inside and locked in has ever been recovered. This includes living beings. Few answers have been found out about where they go, and it's possible the box could be used to dispose of specimens deemed to be too dangerous. But with no answers about where they go and when they might come back, this may be too risky. Because SCP-004 is fixed in place, special containment procedures focus on making sure it stays that way. It is strictly forbidden to take any of the other keys through the door, for fear of losing them or causing it to react in an unpredictable way. If the site should be breached, or anything contained in Site-62 manages to escape containment, the Foundation is ready to activate the on-site warhead. Only employees with Level 1 clearance can access the site, and only Level 4s and above can use the keys, with all knowing that any attempt to remove the keys from the site will result in immediate termination. For now, SCP-004 remains fenced off, with only select experiments continuing, as the Foundation tries to unravel its mysteries. But whatever lurks behind that wooden door, it keeps its secrets well.
It was the summer of 2012 in Damascus, and for the people of Syria, it certainly seemed like all the predictions about the end of the world were coming true. The Syrian civil war was raging between multiple rebel groups, and the dictator Bashar al-Assad, whose government was shelling its own people, as well as using chemical weapons and brutal campaigns of violence across the country in hopes of quelling the rebellion. Little did they know, amidst all this pain and bloodshed, something even more dangerous was brewing. An anomalous phenomenon in the sunny plains north of Damascus that may pose a threat to all of humanity someday. A threat known to the SCP Foundation as SCP-3989, the Bone Orchard. This temporal and spatial anomaly was discovered a few years earlier in 2009, before the Syrian civil war even officially began. It's strange for a highly dangerous Keter-class anomaly to be discovered under such seemingly mundane circumstances. The SCP Foundation first became aware of SCP-3989 after a small olive orchard owner sold a strangely high amount of olives that shouldn't have been possible when compared to his reported number of Olea europaea olive trees. Field agents were dispatched to question the owner about his sudden success, but he was resistant to questioning. The agents began a covert surveillance operation to figure out what was actually going on here, at which point they discovered a considerable spatial anomaly. The olive orchard was far bigger on the inside. The property was seized by the Foundation for containment. The owner had no real knowledge of the spatial anomaly. It's likely he just decided not to look a gift horse in the mouth while making money hand over fist from the extra olives he sold. The owner was given amnestics and a new life, as the Foundation began to study this anomaly, which was now labeled SCP-3989. To this day, no researcher has been able to figure out the origin of 3989's anomalous qualities. It was first given a Euclid class designation and cordoned off from the public with a simple chain-link fence, while Foundation investigations were underway on the inside. On a map, the plot of land the olive farm should occupy is about 5 square acres, but this plot contains an unseen portal to a pocket dimension within its 12-meter active zone, which doesn't follow the same spatial laws that our reality does. This subdimension, known as SCP-3989-A, is a hotbed of fascinating anomalous activity. Upon discovery of this hot zone, the Foundation established the nearby Area 126 as a research center and a makeshift containment facility.
for any anomalous entities captured from SCP-3989-A. It seemed like the Foundation really had a handle on this situation, but they were blissfully unaware of the true horrors lurking within SCP-3989-A. But they'd soon find out, in the most horrifying way possible. Dr. Farrah Ghazelli was assigned to head the research into the anomalous zone within 3989, and naturally, he began organizing fact-finding expeditions into the heart of the affected area. The first guinea pig to head into the hot zone was former Foundation agent Hosea Herrick, who'd been demoted to the lowly D-class position of D-126-15 due to failures on a previous mission. With a remote link to Dr. Ghazelli, Herrick was forced to venture into the active anomalous zone to collect footage and samples of the flora and fauna within. The first thing Herrick noticed on his expedition was the strange quality of the olive trees within the active zone. The bark was a stark white, and the leaves a bloody red. Up close, Herrick could see that the trunks and branches of the trees had undergone a process known as ossification, where the material slowly becomes bone or bone-like tissue. Hence the anomaly's creepy name, the Bone Orchard. These ossified trees became known as SCP-3989-1. Herrick also made another discovery. All over the trees and ground were worm-like creatures that looked like long maggots that the Foundation dubbed SCP-3989-1A. Agent Herrick then noticed something was off about the leaves of the ossified trees. They were beating. He looked closer and they appeared to be heart tissue filled with pumping veins. Dr. Ghazelli ordered Herrick to take a branch for testing, and when he did, the tree began to bleed. When he looked down, he saw that the worm-like creatures that covered the ground were now crawling up his legs. Ignoring orders from Dr. Ghazelli, Herrick fled from the active zone in terror. As he left, Dr. Ghazelli caught something in the corner of Herrick's body cam footage, a long white hind limb disappearing behind a tree. Back in our normal dimension, tests on the sample Herrick collected yielded more upsetting discoveries. Genetically, the trees were identical to humans, the trunks were human bone, and the leaves really were made of human heart tissue. Fascinated and just a little bit horrified, Dr. Ghazelli authorized further expeditions into 3989-A. This time, though, Agent Herrick would be accompanied by another D-class, and both would be armed with handguns and protective body armor. As it would turn out, this expedition would be even more horrifying than the first. As the two D-classes explored the active zones to collect further samples, they found that the worms were responsible for the ossification of the otherwise non-anomalous olive trees. They consumed the wood little by little and deposited human bone matter in return. Herrick and his companion also noticed that these trees were beginning to bear fruit. Dr. Ghazelli ordered Herrick to collect some of this fruit for testing, but when they attempted to remove the fruit, it burst, releasing more worm creatures. It seemed that the converted trees acted as incubators for their egg sacs. Before the duo could return with the samples they were able to take, the creature that had been spotted on Herrick's body cam during the first mission finally appeared. It was huge, with long white limbs, and no facial features except for a huge mouth. It grabbed Herrick's companion and literally ate the top half of his body in a single bite, before dropping his legs to the ground. This horrifying beast, and the many others like it, would later be designated as SCP-3989-2A. Herrick pulled out his sidearm and shot the creature several times. The creature ignored the bullets though, and charged Herrick. The feed from his body cam cut out soon after. Both men were declared killed in action, and in recognition of his sacrifice, Josiah Herrick was posthumously reinstated to his old position in the Foundation. Job well done, Agent. Dr. Ghazelli, meanwhile, prepared for the next mission. This time knowing of the clear dangers present within the Bone Orchard, Dr. Ghazelli recruited the help of MTF Zeta-9, aka the Mole Rats. 3 members, referred to as Charlie Team, were sent into the anomalous zone, once again remotely directed by Dr. Ghazelli. They were equipped with experimental ultrasound technology, so they could scan the fruit of the trees within 3989-A without breaking any and incurring the wrath of 3989-2A, which seemed to act as sentries for the trees. Early on in their journey, they found the body of Agent Herrick crucified against one of the ossified trees. his skin covered in mysterious symbols that were likely of Sarkic origin. While we don't have time to fully explore Sarkicism, that will require a video explanation all of its own. All you need to know is that it's a dangerous religious cult that worships flesh and disease and has close ties to similar dangerous anomalies, like SCP-610, also known as the Flesh That Hates. People familiar with that SCP will note eerily strange similarities to some of the things the mole rats were about to encounter. As Charlie Team explored, they saw a huge number of 3989-2As observing them with eyeless faces from between the ossified trees. They pressed on until they discovered what seemed to be an entirely new kind of tree within the Bone Orchard. SCP-3989-2 were huge trees made out of what appears to be enlarged human spines in place of a trunk. The smaller twigs on the tree were made from heart and lung tissue, and the whole thing was covered in what appeared to be human amniotic sacs. Charlie Team attempted to use their ultrasound scanners to discover the contents of these sacs, but one of them exploded in the process, releasing an entirely new variety of monster. From the sacs emerged the larval stage of SCP-3989-2B, smaller humanoid monsters with no faces, no sensory organs, 2 pelvises, 4 legs, and an exposed spine. Suddenly, Charlie Team could feel a horrifying Sarkic presence around them, which one member of the team described as being like someone grabbing her liver and giggling in her face. As the various monsters of the Bone Orchard began to converge on the team, the voice of the Sarkic prophet of war and the hunt, Orok, began sounding in their ears. He was beckoning them to join him. While Charlie Team fled from the active zone, Dr. Gazzelli felt increasingly drawn into it. He heard the voice of Orok, and he liked what he heard. Little by little, the workers of Area 126 were losing their minds, manipulated by the Sarkic power of the Bone Orchard right next to them, day after day. They were no longer loyal to the Foundation. They wanted to serve their new dark masters. The 4th and final expedition was led by Dr. Gazzelli himself. He took a band of loyal followers and one non-believer on a quest into the active zone to find an Orcian temple they believed was hidden in the very heart of the Bone Orchard. Once they were inside, Gazzelli and his loyalists murdered the non-believer as a sacrifice to their new master. They carried on until they eventually found what they were looking for, a giant stone temple resembling an Aztec ziggurat, dubbed SCP-3989-4. There they also encountered a new kind of monster, dubbed SCP-3989-3. These beasts were larger than the others and resembled ancient warriors. They had insect-like exoskeletal armor, horned heads, additional hind and forelimbs, and integrated bladed weapons. What Dr. Gazzelli and his companions thought would be paradise turned out to be a kind of hell as they were led into the temple, where temporal and spatial distortions broke their mind, and the multiple highly aggressive instances of SCP-3989-3, -2A, and -2B broke their bodies. The whole thing had been a horrifying trap. In that moment, back at Area 126, another fleshy, horrifying tree sprouted out of the ground in the middle of the complex. Monsters that had once been Dr. Gazzelli and his followers emerged from its amniotic sacs, and all hell broke loose throughout the complex. Soon enough, the base was crawling with monsters from the Bone Orchard and staff who'd become brainwashed Sarkic cultists working in service of Orok. Humans were gathered up to be sacrificed to the ever-growing number of anomalous trees. Things came to a head when the anomaly in Area 126 was visited by an outside agent from the Foundation, working on behalf of the Hazardous Materials Containment Liaison. Biological Containment Specialist Dr. Marshall Grant and his team arrived at the site and were horrified to see the Sarkic nightmare that had unfolded. They quickly engaged in a firefight with the anomalous creatures and Sarkic devotees who'd gained control over Area 126. A number of Dr. Grant's team were lost in the process, but thankfully, they were able to eventually regain control of the base and the anomalous area. After this incident, SCP-3989 was upgraded to Keter class and given a huge upgrade in security, including 4-meter-high concrete walls and a platoon-sized regiment of Mobile Task Force members with heavy weaponry. The force that took over the minds of those exposed was designated SCP-3989-5. a force so powerful that those infected are given the choice to self-terminate or be contained forever. This may seem like a somewhat happy ending to a grim tale, but one detail keeps Dr. Grant and everyone at the Foundation who is forced to deal with 3989 awake at night. According to all recent studies into the Bone Orchard, it isn't contained at all. In fact, the active zone is getting bigger. Bodies litter the United States. A horrific act of serial murder, but who could be behind it? On January 14, 2023, nature documentary fans were treated to the first episode of Tides of Change, a new docuseries narrated by David Attenborough, hitting the airwaves. The episode began with a beautiful shot of a colorful coral reef, as Attenborough's mellifluous voiceover explained that the reef was hundreds of years old. In one moment that confused audiences, he also stated that,
"If you're listening to my voice right now, it means I have yet to free my consciousness from Vikander Needs Network broadcast systems."
But the show didn't linger on that odd statement. Instead, it followed the camera through the ocean as a school of mackerel swam by. A whale carcass was shown rotting on the ocean floor, picked clean by hundreds of smaller creatures over the course of a time-lapse. An octopus swam through the water. A seagull picked up a piece of garbage from the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. For a brief, shining moment, the words, "Help me," appeared in bright red letters on screen, before disappearing. Attenborough continued his monologue, highlighting the importance of change in the world. But this episode was about more than the massive notion of change and the links between the many and the few. The series also planned to highlight individual players in the grand scheme of life. One of these players was set to appear next. As Attenborough said,
"Even for those who resist change, change still comes eventually, often when you'd least expect it."
The scene then transitioned to a prison inside of a hollowed-out brain coral. That's right, an underwater prison designed for hardened oceanic criminals. Within the gray concrete walls and barred windows, there was a certain arthropod wearing a black and white striped hat. Arthropods, for the uninitiated, can include crabs, lobsters, shrimp, and barnacles. This particular arthropod, the one dragging a floating ball and chain behind him, was an Anomalocaris canadensis named KRILLER McAllister. Once incarcerated for serial arson, it was time for KRILLER to taste free seawater again. A big day, to be sure. As KRILLER swam toward the exit for the first time since he was sentenced, Attenborough narrated,
"And while KRILLER isn't the smartest, nor most well-liked member of the community, he is one of a kind, the sole surviving member of his species. He's also not so different from you or I, believe it or not. For example, he and I are both in a prison of sorts, though one of us is being released far sooner than the other, from the look of things."
KRILLER swam up to the front desk, where a sea cucumber wearing a guard's outfit was waiting. The sea cucumber tried desperately to swim away from the set, but was prodded back into position. There must have been behind-the-scenes difficulties, because the footage then cut to a human dressed like a sea cucumber dressed like a prison guard, who stamped some paperwork for KRILLER. Then, he was free. He cast off his ball, chain, and hat, collected a small box of personal effects, loaded onto his back by a rod and hook, and ventured out into the great unknown. The show was canceled shortly after, but many of the few dozen viewers that tuned into the show described the arthropod's performance as gripping and heartwarming. David Attenborough's whereabouts are currently unknown, though representatives at Vikander Need insist that he is absolutely fine and very much still human, whatever that means. We aren't here to talk about that. We're here to discuss KRILLER McAllister. It may surprise you to hear this, but KRILLER is known today by another moniker, SCP-6549. A few months after his television debut, this inspiring arthropod would find himself behind bars once more. This time his crime would be far greater than arson. He was going to be arrested for murder. SCP-6549 is a single Anomalocaris canadensis, approximately 35 centimeters long. There is nothing physically anomalous about SCP-6549, aside from the fact that he belongs to an otherwise extinct species. His size and shape are consistent with fossil records. He has a soft pre-chitinous exoskeleton, 2 barbed frontal appendages, compound eyes capable of 360-degree vision, and flaps on both sides of his body that can undulate in a synchronized manner in order to allow the creature to move through water efficiently. The entity has an extremely short temper and is easily provoked. Several Foundation personnel have described him as a, quote, real live wire. While under Foundation observation, KRILLER has displayed a penchant for attacking by whipping its barbed frontal appendages at a target. However, this may not be the only way the creature attacks those it views as enemies. Mountains of evidence have emerged since the Foundation first became aware of KRILLER's existence, evidence that implicates SCP-6549 in over 25 unsolved homicides committed over the course of 4 months across 13 different countries. In each of these crimes, the killing involved a weapon or skill that should be impossible for SCP-6549 to use or accomplish. Or rather, it would be impossible if KRILLER did not possess additional anomalous qualities that have yet not been discovered. It is uncertain exactly how KRILLER pulled off these crimes, but the Foundation has not yet ruled out the possibilities of telepathically linked accomplices, nanotechnology, or an anti-memetic extra-dimensional hammer space. Whatever the case may be, it seems undeniable that KRILLER is somehow responsible. KRILLER first achieved a degree of fame and then infamy through his performance in the aforementioned Tides of Change, which combined elements of wildlife documentary and slice-of-life dramedy. The SCP Foundation has flagged this particular detail as notable, as the show was produced by Vikander Need Technical Media, a known group of interest specializing in cursed media. Their mission and mode of operation are still difficult to ascertain, but their involvement in the project indicates that it may warrant further investigation. During the production of the first season, KRILLER was fired from the project. This firing is regarded as one cause, if not the primary cause, of the show's cancellation. The exact reason for SCP-6549 being fired is unknown, but a phone call made on February 10, 2023 from a Foundation-monitored payphone near Halifax, Nova Scotia has provided some insight into the situation surrounding the firing. The call was made to VKTM Public Relations Liaison Marie McPherson, and the voice on the other side is suspected to be SCP-6549. The conversation occurred at 2:29 a.m. McPherson answered the phone, and after a bit of gurgling and silence, a high-pitched but serious voice responded. The voice, believed to be KRILLER, said,
I know you think I'm being unreasonable, just hear me out, okay?
McPherson refused, pointing out that he had shattered a stagehand's femur the previous day. This set the other caller off, and he began ranting.
How come the friggin' narrator gets his own trailer, huh? I deserve my own trailer. I deserve an assistant. They need me. You need me.
McPherson sighed and argued back that David did not require corporeal accommodations or pay for his work. KRILLER interrupted.
It was my face on the poster, Mary! My talent that springboarded us to fame, Mary! What, do you think it was all because of that hack, Appleborough?
Attenborough, she corrected.
I don't care what his name is! I want a second chance. You need to talk to someone or things could get out of hand.
McPherson rolled her eyes, stifling a yawn. You're not Ryan Gosling trying to pull off your magnum opus. You're an uncredited ancestral arthropod in the B-plot of a nature documentary with like 500 weekly viewers. Frankly, one of the worst performing VKTM programs in recent history. Suddenly, KRILLER cut her off. His voice had a new edge to it.
What did you just say? Did you just say I'm the friggin' B-plot of Tides of Change?
McPherson attempted to explain this situation to KRILLER, but he wouldn't listen.
I see what's going on here. This is all Tony's friggin' fault. That bean counter probably gave us so little budget, knowing we'd blow it all on nice stock footage of that old codger, so that there would be any left over for my amenities, right? He was always jealous of me, trying to undermine my career.
McPherson had had enough. What career? You're being ridiculous. You need to move on from the project and from this. Suddenly, KRILLER took a deep breath. His tone became unusually calm, unsettlingly calm. He agreed, apologizing for his outburst. But when McPherson hung up the phone, the rage burst out of him in one more screed.
Sorry that I'm not sorry! Not sorry! you glorified friggin' primate.
Oh, look at me. I can walk upright. I've got phalanges that evolved to grip tools and stabilize while I sleep in a friggin' tree like a friggin' idiot! Evolve, please. We'll see about that, won't we?
This conversation marks the beginning of KRILLER's decline. Marie McPherson was found dead the next day, and the murder spree did not stop there. Over the following months, a string of unsolved murders attracted the attention of the international intelligence community. Each was a clear crime of passion, with the same modus operandi. One bullet hole through the head, point blank, aiming downward, assassination style. The authorities did not know this, but there was one connection between all of the victims. They were all connected to VKTM. The authorities also didn't know about the arthropod that made for quite the prime suspect. He was, after all, a disgraced former VKTM employee known for rage issues and violent outbursts. Sure, there was nothing in KRILLER's physiology that indicated he would be capable of holding, let alone firing, a gun, but the signs still pointed to him. This psycho KRILLER's killing spree came to a close on June 23, 2023. Local police in Anaheim, California received a call about gunshots in the area. When they responded, they found one victim lying there unresponsive. Like the others, they had died from a single shot to the head. Their identity was later confirmed as the executive producer of an unnamed documentary series. You can probably guess which one. SCP-6549 was found on the scene, sitting next to the body. Next, in a puddle of seawater, was a gun. Though it seemed impossible, forensics quickly confirmed that the gun was, in fact, the murder weapon. The obvious lack of thumbs would suggest that KRILLER couldn't fire said gun, but the crime scene analysis didn't lie. The arthropod was taken into custody by some thoroughly perplexed police, who reached out to Animal Control. Embedded Foundation operatives in the Animal Control Department quickly spread the word, and a Foundation retrieval team was sent to bring the murderous sea creature in for further study. The retrieval team struggled to get SCP-6549 under control, and it thrashed at the officers with its pointy legs. One man, Officer Higgins, swore that he saw the creature pull a switchblade, though his colleagues could not corroborate this report. Once they had wrangled the unruly creature, they took it to Elise Buchin, Assistant Director of Site 184's Aquatic Anomalies Department, for her own personal review. One officer delivered it to her, but cautioned that she bring in a few additional personnel before interacting with the entity. She was dubious about claims of its potential danger. She had not, as it turns out, read the report. In her words, "I only just learned we were getting an angry 500-million-year-old shrimp the size of a small dog like half an hour ago. I've been getting the containment area set up, not much time for a brief myself on this, I'm afraid." She was quickly briefed on the nature of the case and the bizarre trail of murders that followed SCP-6549. The officer briefing her concluded that our little friend here must have gotten sloppy. At this, SCP-6549 began to shake his container violently, gurgling with rage. Buchin jumped at the sound and gasped, "Qu'est-ce que c'est? Sounds like distilled anger being strained through cheesecloth. How often does it make those god-awful noises?" Apparently, though the creature was supposed to be capable of speech, it had not spoken since its capture. Instead, it had made these same horrible gurgling sounds. Then, the officer left, and Buchin was alone with SCP-6549. It was then that she tapped into her top-tier interrogation training, attempting to draw out a response. I don't buy it. Not only do I think you can talk, I think it probably pains you not to. You're a celebrity, right? Don't celebrities let the fame get to their heads? They think everyone wants to hear them talk, that everything revolves around them. Then they lose it all in a sense of misguided, self-absorbed acts that benefit no one. The container rattled, and SCP-6549 thumped its body against the metal wall of its container. Am I close? Did I hit a nerve? You lost it all, including your relationships, I bet. She leaned in as SCP-6549 continued to thump against the walls of its container. Were you being a bit of a selfish shellfish? This was the straw that broke the camel's back. SCP-6549 exploded, shouting in perfect English,
You bitch! You did it now! I'll kill you! Reducing my existence to a bad pun, you are going to regret having legs! Let me out!
The creature was so overcome with rage, it knocked its container onto the ground. The hatch came loose, and SCP-6549 was able to escape. Its eyes glowed white, and it floated into the air in front of Buchin as she backed away in terror. KRILLER cackled wickedly.
It's time for me to become the main character of this world. Then they'll take me back. She'll have to take me back. Step 1,
Eliminate all competition, starting with you.
Busheen braced herself, covering her face. But then a miracle. KRILLER noticed the blinking red light of the security camera.
Wait, have we been recording this entire time? I think I missed a cue.
Busheen realized her chance. Yes, this is a live broadcast. Why did you think we had our driver come pick you up specifically? You've been selected to play the protagonist. This is your real rise to stardom. Well, KRILLER was positively delighted at this news.
No B-plots?
He checked. Nope, this show doesn't need a B-plot. Too much intrigue. With a delighted chitter, KRILLER agreed to sign on to the project. Busheen saw her opening and pushed further. We've anticipated your arrival and have set up personal quarters for your use. Since you will be working so closely with the project, you should stay on site. On set.
My own trailer. It's actually happening. Thank you.
KRILLER followed Busheen to his containment happily, where he remains to this day. Today, SCP-6549 is kept in a secure carbon fiber reinforced aluminosilicate glass aquarium, contained within the Site-184 Aquatic Anomalies Containment Sector. The aquarium has been fitted with environmental monitoring equipment and an automatic feeding system, which dispenses food for the entity on a predetermined schedule. Because KRILLER's abilities are still relatively unknown, any Foundation personnel handling him are to do so with extreme caution. Protective eye shielding, padded gloves, and a Kevlar vest are all requirements to handle or interact with SCP-6549. SCP-6549 may not be left unattended at any time. If it is let out of its habitat, at least 2 security personnel must be present. If he begins acting out, as his fiery personality frequently causes him to do, his tantrums can be quelled with one reliable method. Personnel should simply point to any cameras in the room and remind SCP-6549 in a gentle tone of voice that we're rolling. This has an 80% chance of temporarily reducing aggression, as KRILLER wants to ensure that he comes off well in the definitive cut of the footage being shot. Of course, these are just security cameras and are not shooting any sort of show, but he doesn't need to know that. It seems that even ancient criminal arthropods are not immune to the allure of stardom. Maybe one day KRILLER will get his time in the spotlight, but for now, he's at least a minor celebrity within the walls of the SCP Foundation. Now check out the horror of body-stealing rain, SCP-3300, and SCP-3280 After the Storm.